Welcome to the IDP Plus Advice Show. Today we're going to talk about Week 5 IDP snap counts, defensive alignment and positioning of our IDPs, injuries, waiver impacts, trade targets, etc. I am your host, Ricky Rodriguez. You can find me at RickyRod66. Unfortunately, Shawn Teague, my partner in crime, who is normally here with me today, he is unable to join because of a family school event. I believe it's a basketball games. He does send his best, and he will be back here next Tuesday. He confirmed with me before the show that no basketball games next Tuesday. So I'll try to plan and channel my inner Shawn thoughts into the discussion as well as we're going through everything. As always, you can leave your comments and questions on the YouTube IDP Plus channel specifically for this show. And Shawn and I will periodically go in and answer your questions. And of course, we always do appreciate a thumbs up. And if you enjoy the show, and if you could subscribe to the channel, that would be awesome as well. All right, we're going to go ahead and jump into things right away. One of the things Shawn and I did want to do is work on shortening the show. And so I'm going to try and make that happen this week as well, even without Shawn. So start with the Buffalo Bills in the AFC East. Buffalo Bills played 60 snaps on defense versus the New England Patriots. Terrell Bernard had 6 tackles, which was tied for the team lead. But once again, we're just not getting that productivity that we would expect out of Terrell Bernard. A lot of people drafted him as a linebacker 1, but right now I think we treat him as a linebacker 2, folks. Moving to the number 2 linebacker position, we saw the re-return and the re-exit of Matt Milano. He played roughly half the game. He played about 53% of the snaps. In that time, he actually had as many tackles as Terrell Bernard did, with 6 as well. But he did leave with a pec injury. And last time was a multi-week injury. This is a reoccurrence of the same injury. Expect him to be out multiple weeks. Now, Dorian Williams was also ruled out before the game with the injury, so did not play. So as a result, Shaq Thompson, the veteran from the Carolina Panthers who signed with the Bills this year, who has that relationship with Sean McDermott from when he was with Carolina, Shaq Thompson is the one that picked up the snaps for Dorian Williams. He played that third linebacker role, that Dorian Williams usually played when all the linebackers are active and injury-free. And then, of course, when Milano went out, he played the number 2 linebacker role because Dorian Williams was out. In that short time, he played, in total, he played 67% of the snaps, and he had 5 tackles during that time, including a sack. So anyway, watch the injury reports for Dorian Williams, and knowing that Matt Milano will be out for several weeks, Shaq Thompson can be a sneaky pickup on your waiver wires this week, folks. Keep that in mind as you're doing your waivers. Moving to the edge position, Joey Bosa disappointingly fell all the way down to 55% of the snaps. I've been on the Joey Bosa bandwagon a little bit, actually quite a bit, because he's performed fairly well. Shawn has been down on Joey Bosa because of the concern of injury. The good news is the snap count wasn't down because of injury, but with a decrease to 55% of the snaps, we saw a decrease in his production with only 1 tackle. The big news, one of the things I've been calling out, is Greg Rousseau. We need to get him to that 70% and above snap count as opposed to the 60s or low 60s where he's been. Good news at 70%, that in a combination of playing the Patriots, he ended up with 6 tackles, 3 quarterback hits, and a sack. So is this the awakening of Greg Rousseau? Hopefully. Is he going to play more snaps? Hopefully so as well. And with them not having a big lead or dominating the game, maybe this is what we'll see, particularly in closer games for the Bills. So if the Bills are playing what is expected to be a more competitive game, I think it'd be more comfortable playing Rousseau, maybe in teams that they're expected to beat by, let's call it a line of 7.5, 6.5 or more points. Then maybe you don't play him because we might see that snap count fall back to the 60% range. On the secondary side of things, Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop basically played all the snaps. But what was interesting, Taylor Rapp played 68% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage. That is not typical for Taylor Rapp. But with that, he only delivered 3 tackles. Cole Bishop still also played 54% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage. He only had 2 tackles. The good news for him, though, at least, is he did get a sack late in the game that sort of saved his IDP line for those that played him this week. But Bishop is just not putting up the kind of numbers we were expecting this year. He's someone I'd be comfortable moving on from. The last thing for those wondering about Teron Johnson, yes, he did play the slot cornerback position. He played 100% of his snaps in the slot or in the box, but he only played 65% of the snaps this week. And once again, the Bills defense only played 60. As a related note, Tom Kislingberry, so I wanted to give a shout out to him. He did a study for the first 3 weeks of the year that I just saw. Granted, it was only the first 3 weeks, but the average snap count for defenses has been 65 this year, not 63 to 63 and a half. So just as an FYI. So 60 is definitely below 65. Okay. Moving on to Miami. And I think most of people knew that from a math perspective, that 60 is less than 65. Moving on to the Dolphins, who did really poop the bed. Is that allowed to be said? Against the Panthers, and they played 70 snaps on defense. Jordan Brooks played 99% of the snaps, led the team once again this week with another great line. It's 2 weeks in a row having 13 tackles, including half a sack, so fantastic job by Jordan Brooks. Tyrell Dodson suffered a concussion during the game. He only played 64% of the snaps, and that's why he only had 4 tackles. But it wasn't Willie Gay that came into the game. And this happened during preseason as well. KJ Britt was the one that came in for Tyrell Dodson and manned the middle of that defense, and Jordan Brooks stayed in his normal position. KJ Britt played 31% of the snaps. He had 3 tackles. Keep an eye on the Tyrell Dodson injury. Now, I know there's only 2 teams on bye this coming week, Houston and Minnesota. But if you're in a pinch as a result, maybe those buys and this Tyrell Dodson injury, KJ Britt, not the greatest of fill-ins, but as a linebacker 4 type, maybe a low-end linebacker 3, KJ Britt has a chance to potentially help you out during this 1 week if Tyrell Dodson is unable to get through the concussion protocol. Moving to the defensive end side of things, or the edge side of things, Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb both played mid 70% of snaps. As we've talked about in previous shows, their snap counts have been going up. Those of Chop Robinson and Matt Judon have gone down. If you haven't, particularly in redraft, if you haven't dropped Chop Robinson, please feel free to do so and drop him. But Jalen Phillips, we talked about how he was starting to show signs of life, even though the productivity wasn't there. He ended up with 3 tackles, a couple of quarterback hits, and a sack. So great news. Once again, that was on 70 snaps, more than the average of 65. And it was against the Panthers and Bryce Young. So we do want to keep that in perspective. We don't want to go overboard. But Jalen Phillips is someone, if maybe he had an edge injury, maybe dealing with a Travon Walker injury, maybe that's someone you can consider picking up off the waiver wire. In the interior defensive line, Zach Zeeler played 80% of the snaps. 3 tackles, including 1 quarterback hit. Not much to talk about there. Everyone else was 43% and below from a snap count perspective in the interior defensive line. In the secondary, Minkah Fitzpatrick played 100% of the snaps, had 9 tackles, which was second on the team, and once again had a very beautiful line of playing 67% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage. And for those that are new, when I say close to the line of scrimmage, it means he played as an off-ball linebacker, or in the box and / slot, and or on the defensive line, like threatening a blitz. So 67% close to the line of scrimmage. He finally got those big numbers we're looking for, and on top of that, he added an interception for us as well. That's what we've been looking for from Minkah Fitzpatrick. Hopefully those stats will continue, particularly with that close to the line of scrimmage utilization. At the other safety role, let's just put it this way, we want to avoid it. Ashton Davis played 83% of the snaps. Dante Trader played 17%. Add those 2 up, you get 100. Ashton Davis only had 5 tackles, Dante Trader 2. Between the playing time and those kind of stats, we're not going to chase that. Ifeatu Melifonwu did get 5 tackles, but that was only on 36% of the snaps. He played like a third safety type of role. is how it appeared to be, particularly with some of the injuries they've had in the secondary. But he's just not getting enough playing time. That rotation with Davis, Melifonwu, Trader, just stay away from it, folks. Be going with it. Cornell Armstrong played 33% of the snaps before he went out with a hamstring injury. He was basically their slot cornerback until he got hurt. So we were staying away from him anyway, but just as an FYI, because we do like to call out, Shawn and I, who are the slot cornerbacks. Moving to the New England Patriots, who played 68 snaps versus the Buffalo Bills, so just slightly more than average. Robert Spillane played all 68 snaps, tied for the team lead in tackles with Christian Ellis, with both of them having 8. They didn't do anything else. That's all they had was tackles. But just like that safety number 2 for the Dolphins, we're absolutely staying away from linebacker 2 for the Patriots. We just cannot trust it based on the snap counts. Yes, it was nice that Ellis had 8 tackles, but he did it on only 54% of the snaps. That's not a sustainable efficiency from a tackle efficiency perspective, everyone. But get this, Christian Ellis played 54%. Jack Gibbons played 35%. Marte Mapu also played 7% of the snaps, so that was down for him. But if you listen to the Start Sit show on Sunday morning, you heard me talk about the fact that Jelani Tavai on Saturday afternoon, the Patriots activated him from injured reserve, added him to the 53-man roster, and he got in for 22% of the snaps. So there was this 4-headed monster going on in the Patriot linebacker positions outside of Spillane. Stay away from all of them is the recommendation from both Shawn and I on this. Excuse me. Moving to the edge position, Kayla Chason was out with a hamstring injury. He was listed as questionable. On Saturday, they changed him to out completely. Very disappointing because while his pass rush win rate metrics have only been average, he has been productive. At least he's been able to translate that, particularly in sack-heavy scoring leagues. He's been able to help us out. But he did not play. In his absence, Keon White played 34% of the snaps. Anthony Jennings played 32%. Ponder played 19%. And Tavai actually played a little bit on the edge as well. So if Chason comes back in deeper leagues, you can certainly use him. If not, you don't want to touch any of these guys. Howard Landry played 91% of the snaps because of the injury. He had 5 tackles and a quarterback hit. On the defensive line, we had both Milton Williams and Christian Barmore on the interior defensive line, that is, with both about 60% of the snaps. It was nice to see Milton Williams help us with a half a sack to go along with his 4 tackles. Christian Barmore continues to have great pass rush win rate. Once again, that's from PFF stats, so shout out to PFF. But they're not quite translating to those sacks and a ton of quarterback hits like we'd like. That gives us our IDP scoring. So we're going to continue to monitor on Barmore. Milton Williams would be ahead of him right now. Moving to the secondary, Craig Woodson played 99% of the snaps. Jalen Hawkins, who was questionable almost all week with a hamstring, ended up being taken off the injury report on Friday, played 100% of the snaps. Now, Craig Woodson only played 36% of the snaps deep this week, which means he played 64% close to the line. Jalen Hawkins played 65% deep, only 35% close to the line. Jalen Hawkins has been able to be productive, particularly with big plays. He's been very fortunate from that regard. So Hawkins finished with 3 tackles, and he got a half a sack, and he also got a fumble recovery. So those big plays helped his IDP scoring line if you look at just his total numbers in your scoring system. However, only 3 tackles and playing deep that regularly, and that's been a consistent trend for him. That's not going to bode well in the long term, so be careful in your utilization of him. Craig Woodson, considering he played so many snaps close to the line of scrimmage, unfortunately only had 4 tackles, of which 3 were solo. Particularly playing 68 snaps, would like to have seen more out of Craig Woodson, but it just didn't happen, unfortunately. Lastly, Marcus Jones was the nickel cornerback. He played 90% of his snaps in the slot and box of the 76% that he got to play, which was great that he got in that high 70 range, particularly for a slot cornerback, and came up with 7 tackles, an interception, some punt return yardage, a tackle for loss. Really great all-around game from Marcus Jones, particularly for those in punt return yardage leagues. Marcus Jones is someone to consider in your cornerback league. I'd assume that he's probably off of waivers, but maybe he's not, and someone you can pick up. All right, moving on to the New York Jets. 60 snaps is all they played on defense versus the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys were able to march up and down the field pretty quickly. The New York Jets are the only team that does not have a takeaway from anybody on their defense through 5 weeks. That's pretty bad, and that would be one of the reasons that they are probably the only team without a victory. But 60 snaps, good news is Jamie and Sherwood at least gave us 7 tackles and a quarterback hit. Would like to have a little bit more, but on 60 tackles, that's hard to do. Kiko Mawigoa did once again play that second linebacker role. He played 83% of the snaps, but only had 4 tackles. Now, I kind of mentioned that. I forget if it was show last week or the start-sit show. A later round rookie being thrust into the lineup this early is not a recipe for success. And I believe it was the start-sit show that also mentioned Mykal Walker was signed to the 53-man roster. Not that Mykal Walker is fantastic, but Mykal Walker is someone that has experience. He started many games, particularly back with the Atlanta Falcons. He did play 10% of the snaps, which was 6 in total. Is it something to watch for Mawigoa? I think it is. I could be wrong, but I am not on the Mawigoa bandwagon. And if you did play him, I'd certainly be looking for other options. I just don't trust it, folks. Moving to the edge position, Will McDonald led with 60% of the snaps. And Will McDonald, he's pretty much sack or bust, as we've often talked about. He had 1 tackle. He did get a quarterback hit, but that was about it. Michael Clemens was down to 53% of the snaps with Braden McGregor and Tyler Barron doing some other rotation in, but none of those guys are worth picking up, even though Braden McGregor got a sack. Don't go chasing that in his 47% of the snaps. Jermaine Johnson, though, is making the trip to London and is expected to play at this point in time. Jermaine Johnson is someone we do trust more than Will McDonald because he's capable of run stops in addition to sacks. However, we're not that high on him because remember, he's coming off of that Achilles injury. Usually takes a whole extra year before they get that full explosion back, at least based on what we've seen on most players. Jalen Phillips being a great example of that with the injuries he's had. So Jermaine Johnson in a desperate situation, no, he's going to play. He's probably going to be the best of the edge linebackers for the Jets, but not someone we're chasing. He's probably more of an edge 4, I'd say, right now. Moving to the secondary, Tony Adams and Andre Cisco essentially played all the snaps at safety. Adams had 5 tackles, a tackle for loss, and a pass defense, and he played only 57% deep, 43% close to line. So those stats aren't that bad, but Tony Adams is what he kind of is. You probably won't see more than 6, max 7 tackles out of him, even if they get up to 65, 67 snaps kind of thing. He's not someone we're chasing, folks. We're not going after Tony Adams. Andre Cisco played 61% deep, only had 2 tackles. With playing that deep and all, and Andre Cisco is someone that Jacksonville was more than happy to let go. He's had some productivity this year, but once again, not someone we're chasing. Malachi Moore played 38% of the snaps and had 5 tackles on that 38% of the snaps. He played 100% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage. So that was really interesting because when we look at the slot cornerback situation, Isaiah Oliver, who in week 4 took over when Michael Carter II went out of the game for the Jets with a concussion, Oliver came in and had a very productive stat line. In this one, he played 47% of the snaps, as I mentioned, had 2 tackles, and all those 47% of the snaps were close to the line of scrimmage. Now, Jarvis Brownlee also played 12% of the snaps with almost all of those. I think it was 6 of the 7 snaps were close to line of scrimmage as well, including some in the slot. And then Malachi Moore. So it looked like that there was this kind of hodgepodge rotation of people playing in the slot. If there's someone I'm potentially taking a chance on and moving into that role, if Michael Carter, for whatever reason, has a prolonged concussion outage, it might be Malachi Moore. On top of that, as the year progresses, I do expect Malachi Moore to take over for either Adams or Cisco as the Jets record continues to be 0 and whatever or 1 and whatever, and they fall out of the playoff race. You got to think they're going to try and get that rookie who they invested a 4th-round pick in from Alabama more playing time. So Malachi Moore is for someone for down the road here to keep in mind. Okay? All right, let's switch to the AFC North and let's move to our Baltimore Ravens, also known as the Baltimore MASH unit. And I didn't mention it, but we're recording here on Tuesday, October 7th, and we'll be releasing this on Wednesday morning, October 8th. But the Ravens had a decent amount of activity here on October 7th, which we'll get to as I go through their wrap-up. Starting with the linebacker position, of course, the All-Pro Roquan Smith was out with injury due to a hamstring injury. He's expected to miss at least a couple of weeks. That's 1 week he's missed. Wouldn't expect him this coming week as well, based on what's been reported. Teddy Buchanan played 100% of snaps, the rookie out of Cal. And Baltimore played 70 snaps on defense against the Houston Texans. Their offense with Cooper Rush did absolutely nothing. Okay. And their defense was just woeful with all the injuries that they've had. So the offense was so bad, the defense was on the field so much and gave up a lot of points, which meant great IDP productivity with Teddy Buchanan getting 15 total tackles, 8 of which were solo, only 1 tackle for loss. And he did wear the green dot. I have to admit, I was a little bit surprised that Trenton Simpson played 94% of the snaps as well, and he had 10 tackles as well. So he tied for second in the team along with Malachi Starks, who also had 10. He had 4 solo, and he actually even got a sack as well. Part of this, though, I think he played so much, he being Trenton Simpson, is because of all the injuries in the secondary as well. Kyle Hamilton was out. They had to play with undrafted free agent Ruben Lowry in his absence. You had Marlon Humphrey out. You had Chidobe Awuzie out. Nate Wiggins left the game with an injury as well. And then also later in the game, with Houston having such a big lead and them running the ball more, I think all those things contributed to Simpson playing 94% of the snaps. If they can figure out a way to be more competitive, I'm not convinced Simpson will play as many snaps. On top of that, the Ravens made a trade today to help boost their secondary and then give them more strength in the secondary. And we'll talk about that in a little bit here after we talk about edge. But I think all of those things, Simpson won't play as much this coming week. Now, if the Ravens defense does have to play that many snaps, and even if he gets 80% of snaps or so, Simpson can still have some value for you. But I'd be careful of placing that bet, depending on what your options are. I'll leave it at that. Let's go ahead and go to the secondary then. So the trade that happened, the Ravens acquired Aloy Gilman, who's been starting for the Chargers at primarily a deep safety position for the last few years. They acquired him in exchange for Dafe Owe, the edge. And we'll talk about that when we get to the Chargers. But Aloy Gilman gives him another safety to pair along with Malachi Starks that could also allow Kyle Hamilton to play closer to the line when he comes back from injury. Now, Hamilton, while he was listed as questionable going into the weekend on the final injury report, never practiced all week and then was ruled out as expected, as I talked about, I believe, on the Start Sit show on Sunday morning. So there's really no surprise there. But that also means with no practices last week that he's at risk of missing this week as well. So your starting safeties could potentially be a combination of Malachi Starks along with Aloy Gilman this week for the Ravens. In addition, The Ravens also signed Chauncey Gardner-Johnson II, who the Texans released earlier, just a couple of weeks ago, for what's deemed to be, or rumor has it, a bad attitude. We'll just leave it at that. They signed Chauncey Gardner-Johnson to the practice squad, but with his experience and where they are with injuries, he might even get promoted to the active roster as well. So what does all that mean for the Ravens? I wanted to give you all that context and background. For the safety specifically, what it means is I'm trusting Malachi Starks, who had 10 tackles. I'm not trusting Lowry. I'm not trusting Gilman. I'm not trusting Gardner-Johnson this week. And I still have, while some of those guys might play, how much they play and how well they learn the system versus Lowry, all to be determined. We play Starks. We wait and see how this shakes out during this coming week, and then we move from there. I would not want to risk a donut. Moving to the cornerback side of things, I already mentioned that Humphrey and Uwuzie missed the game. In Humphrey's place in the slot was Keon Martin, who played 70% of the snaps as the slot cornerback. He had 5 tackles, but he played 100% of his snaps close to the line of scrimmage. Expecting Humphrey to be out again this week because of the calf injury. Keon Martin in cornerback required leagues could be an interesting play. Now with Nate Wiggins out, Nate Wiggins leaving the game because of his, I believe it was an elbow injury if I remember correctly. Jair Alexander, the veteran who they signed from the Packers, came in and played 40% of the snaps once Wiggins went out of the game. So that's what the cornerback situation is like. A banged-up Jair Alexander, TJ Tampa, Keon Martin as your slot cornerback. Okay. Hopefully that's clear as mud. We play Starks, no the safeties. Unless Hamilton is active, then we play him, of course. Cornerbacks, if you have a cornerback required league, in a very deep league, Keon Martin might be someone to consider. Moving to the edge position, Tavius Robinson, once again, led with 71% of the snaps. Unfortunately, he did not have any tackles. He did get a quarterback hit, but he continues to lead the team and has been fairly productive as like an edge 3, maybe a low end 3, high end 4 this year. Someone you can play, once again, depending on the size of your leagues. Mike Green stayed in the 60% snap count range, which I was pleasantly surprised to see, particularly with Kyle Van Noy coming back from injury. But between probably the blowout of the game that was against Houston and Kyle Van Noy coming back from injury, he only played 27% of the snaps. He did get a sack during that time, which is great. If you did play him, he might have bailed you out with that sack. But what I expect to happen is that his snap count will go up, particularly with the trade of Odafe Owe, who did play 37% of the snaps, who, by the way, his pass rush win rate has not been that bad, according to PFF. It has not translated on the field for Owe. So when we get to the Chargers, we'll talk about him a little bit more, as I mentioned earlier. So what do I expect to happen? I expect Tavius Robinson to continue to lead the edges in snaps. I expect Kyle Van Noy to jump up to that 50 to 60% range. I expect Mike Green to stay in that 50 to 60% range as well. And then David Ojabo, the former second-round pick out of Michigan, who tore his ACL and had other knee damage, I believe, prior to the draft, but the Ravens took a chance on him on the second round, who has never really rounded into the form he showed in college. Expect him to be the 4th edge out of this group. But we're not chasing Ojabo, as a side note. Okay, that is Baltimore. Let us move on to Cincinnati. We're on to Cincinnati. Okay, they played 62 snaps versus the Lions, less than average. Now, Al Golden, the defensive coordinator, continues to play games with us. After 2 weeks of seeing Logan Wilson play roughly, let's just call it 80% of the snaps, and it appearing that Logan Wilson was going to eventually be replaced by Barrett Carter, all of a sudden Logan Wilson plays 100% of the snaps again. Now, He had 8 tackles, and he did get a fumble recovery, which is fantastic. That's a little bit on the high side for what we typically expect for Logan Wilson, but glad that we got it. So if you were in a situation where you had to play him, that's great. Demetrius Knight, whose snap count had shot up way high, came all the way back down to 58%. Even with the uber productivity game he had on that Monday night game, snap count way down, still had 8 tackles on that limited 58% snap count, but you got to be careful playing a linebacker with 58% snap count. He did get 1 tackle for loss. Barrett Carter played more of a third linebacker role, rotation with Demetrius Knight, etc. He played 53% of the snaps and got 6 tackles. So, what does that mean? If you want to take a chance on Logan Wilson, since he played 100% this past week, I'd say, okay, take the risk, but hopefully it's as a linebacker 3 or 4 and not as your linebacker 1 or 2. Demetrius Knight in the deepest of leagues, I mean, really deep, you play him maybe as a linebacker low in 4, high in 5 based on that snap count. I think you can play him at 4 because he's been productive from a tackling perspective. Barrett Carter, we're not playing yet, but we're going to continue to keep an eye on this and monitor this. By the way, at one point in the game, it was tweeted out, if y'all didn't see it, that Jamar Chase was actually leading the team with tackles with 3 because every one of Jake Browning's interceptions were aimed toward Chase, and Chase came up with a tackle on every one of those interceptions. So if you also get points for tackles in your league, Jamar Chase not only had a great fourth quarter, which was fantastic, but he got you extra points with 3 tackles as well. Moving to the edge position, Taylor Decker, the Detroit Lions' outstanding left tackle, ended up getting ruled out on Saturday. As a result, they had the raw rookie Giovanni Manu. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot his name off the top of my head. It's something along those lines. But he's a raw rookie who very athletic, but still needs development time. He got thrust into the lineup as a left tackle. The great news for Trey Hendrickson owners and for those that played him, that means it resulted in 2 Trey Hendrickson's sacks, which is fantastic. He played 60% of the snaps. Osai played 61%. Osai did get a sack as well and had 4 tackles. Myles Murphy did get a sack, which last week we talked about the fact I was starting to see some signs of life out of him. But with caution, he only played 21% of the snaps in a game that was looking like a blowout for a big period of time, although Cincinnati got a lot of junk points in the fourth quarter to help make it look a lot closer. So we're not chasing Myles Murphy, but we're going to continue to keep an eye on Myles Murphy. Moving to the defensive interior, TJ Slayton ended up playing 81% of the snaps, tied for the team lead with Logan Wilson and Demetrius Knight with 8 tackles. That is something not repeatable. It is not likely that he plays 81% of the snaps again. If he does, I just don't see that happening. Of course, Detroit with Gibbs and Montgomery do like to run the ball a lot. That also contributed based on the Lions' running game. Don't go chase TJ Slayton based on this one game. He is a run stuffer, nose tackle type. Usually these run stuffer, nose tackle types are people we do not want to play on our fantasy football teams. Vita Vea is sort of an exception. Jordan Davis, a little bit of an exception, but there's not many of those out there that are the nose tackle types. BJ Hill continues to have a great solid year. He played 74% of the snaps and had 5 tackles, and he also got a quarterback hit. Chris Jenkins, the second-year defensive tackle out of Michigan, played 66% of the snaps, and he had 3 tackles and tackle for loss, and he is actually showing signs of life as well. So at least the good news for the Cincinnati Bengals is some of their interior defensive linemen starting to show a little bit life, and that was only on 62 snaps once again. So if you're in a defensive tackle required league, just some names to keep an eye on. Moving to the secondary, Jordan Battle, Geno Stone, both had 6 tackles. Jordan Battle's case, they were all assisted tackles, not a single solo. He played 100% of the snaps. Geno Stone only played 90% of the snaps. Haven't heard any injury situations of why Geno only played 90%, but I'll continue to try and dig into it, and we'll watch the injury reports on Wednesday here as they start coming out. Both of them played over 60% deep. Well, Jordan Battle played exactly 60%. Geno Stone played 64%. Moving to talk about the slot position, Dax Hill played 100% of the snaps. Unfortunately, he only had 5 tackles. Like it more when he has those 8 or 9 tackles. He played 60% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage, 40% out wide. That's one of the things we do love about Dax Hill is that he does start on the outside, and then when the offense goes to 3 wide, he moves into that slot position. So he's always on the field as opposed to some of these slot cornerbacks that maybe only play 60% of the snaps or 65% of the snaps and only go in during 3 wide situations. So we'd like to have a little bit more productivity, but 5 tackles, not too bad for a slot cornerback on 62 snaps. That's Cincinnati, and we are on to Cleveland now. With Cleveland, they played 65 snaps overseas against the Minnesota Vikings, so right on average, according to Tom Kisling-Barry's calculations that I talked about earlier. The good news for Carson Schlesinger is that his tackle efficiency continues to go up week over week. So great news for the rookie that the more he's playing, the more tackles, the more he's learning the system, the more effective he's becoming. You get the idea. In general, rookie linebackers are not that productive. So for those with Carson Schlesinger, we need to count our lucky stars because he's producing more than a typical rookie linebacker does. But with him playing 100% of the snaps, with where the Browns are going, you can see what they're doing with their offense. With the trade of Flacco today, they're going to continue to play the young guys, Gabriel Sanders, Isaiah Bond, Quinshawn Judkins, Howard Fannin, etc. And that continues on the defensive side here with Schlesinger. Devin Bush, once again, plays in the mid-80s. Unfortunately, not quite as productive as he had been from a tackle efficiency perspective. He only had 6 tackles, but his snap count has increased every week since week 1, including this week where he jumped from 83% to 85%. Not a huge jump, but once again, snap count continues to go up. And if it stays in that range, we can continue to play Devin Bush as like a linebacker 3 type. Moving to the edge, I know we're disappointed that Myles Garrett played 88% of the snaps against that Vikings beat-up line of scrimmage. He didn't get any sacks, but at least he got his 3 tackles. Isaiah McGuire returned to a little bit of a return. He had 2 tackles. Both were tackles for loss. But remember, we joked about him last week too, how everybody was chasing him after that fantastic week 1 he had, then he kind of disappeared. Well, here's your Alex Wright caution. Okay, Alex Wright had 4 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, got a sack, which is great, which means when you get a sack, you also get a quarterback hit and a tackle for loss. That all comes together. He only played 51% of the snaps. He's the backup to McGuire and Garrett. So do not chase Alex Wright based on these numbers, okay? Know the context behind the numbers. That's what we're here to help you with. Don't chase Alex Wright. Moving to the defensive tackle position, I do need to build on my Malik Collins comments from last week. One of the things that they talked about during the broadcast, they talked about the dreaded Malik Collins is in the best shape of his life kind of thing. And we hear that all the time during the offseason. But at least in this case, that is now a couple of weeks in a row, actually maybe 3 weeks in a row, where Malik Collins has been very productive and has this week he had 2 sacks. That's all he had. 2 tackles, which means 2 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits, 2 sacks, and they're both solo. Okay, so that's how that works. He made 2 plays, but they were big plays. Malik Collins continues to flash and show those in interior defensive line / defensive tackle required leagues. Malik Collins, I think we go after, and once again, depending on the matchup, look at that matchup. Look at the points that they give up to defensive tackles, which you can find on the internet. Look at the injuries maybe for the centers and guards for that team that you're going to play. Look at the quarterbacks that are getting sacked a lot if Malik Collins is playing against those kind of teams. That's where you want to stick Malik Collins into your lineup. So there's your Malik Collins and a little bit of more education for those that are a little bit newer on defensive tackles. Moving to the safety position, Ronnie Hickman played 100% of the snaps, had 10 tackles, including 6 solo, which was fantastic for him. So he was second on the team in tackles. He did that while playing 66% of the snaps deep. So you know what I'm going to say. That's probably not sustainable. He hasn't done that in the past. It's more of an outlier. But where I continue to be frustrated with the Browns is my LSU guy. And for those that are watching, not just listening, you see my LSU helmet over my head right now. Grant Delpit plays 98% of the snaps, 61% of them close to the line of scrimmage, but only has 4 tackles, only one of which was solo. Now, he did get lucky in getting a fumble recovery, and he did pick up a pass defense, so that helped us out a little bit. So for an okay line, but very frustrating. If you have other options, particularly in leagues that are, I'll call them shallow from a starting perspective, go ahead and pick up another safety if you've been relying on him. It's time to move on, even though I love the utilization close to the line of scrimmage. Now, I'll tell you, as soon as you drop him, he's going to have one good game and you're going to get frustrated and aggravated, and you're going to try and pick him back up. And then the next week, he's going to revert back to what we have been seeing. Try and say that a little bit better. The Miles Harden has been playing the slot position for the Browns. He played 100% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage, but he only played 62% of the snaps with his 5 tackles. Okay, moving on to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are on bye. So there's nothing to talk about other than the fact that in initial practice reports as they're coming back from bye, Alex Highsmith is practicing, which is great news. Joey Porter is practicing, which is great news. I expect both of those two to play this coming week. The bad news is Jalen Ramsey, according to Coach Tomlin, expected to be limited with a hamstring. We talked about this last week where Shawn had seen, I hadn't, so shout out to Shawn. Shawn had seen that Ramsey did have a hamstring issue that had cropped up late in the previous game. That's why he only played 76% of the snaps. This is leading me to believe that Ramsey's out. So if you're in a cornerback required league, and I've been on the Ramsey bandwagon, as most of you all know, I think it could be safe to drop him, pick up another cornerback, expect him not to play this coming weekend, and then when it looks like he's healthy, maybe grab him once again, particularly with the rest of the secondary getting healthy again. When he's back, he can play that star position, and that's where we want him, and that's where I expect him to be so uber productive for our teams. Okay, let's move to the AFC South. Oh, one other thing. If Highsmith is active, for those of y'all that have been banking on Nick Herbig, you're going to have to put him back on the bench because typically Watt and Highsmith are playing 80% of the snaps. Herbig's playing in the 20-30% range. That's not worth the gamble to play him at that limited snap count. Now we'll move to the AFC South and we'll move to the Houston Texans, who only played 43 snaps against the Ravens. That is hard to fathom. 43 snaps versus a typical average of 65 this year. That's like 2/3 of a typical game. So what does that mean? It means you're not going to have much IDP output, folks. Keep that in mind. If some of your players are playing against the Ravens and playing against Cooper Rush this coming week, and if they're a strong defense like the Texans are, they might not be on the field a whole lot, and they might not have any productivity. So I'm going to start with the edges. So Will Anderson got you 1 tackle. Danielle Hunter, Dylan Hart, Darrell Taylor, Derek Barnett, nothing. It's because they just weren't on the field, and Cooper Rush was just chucking the ball right away and just really didn't do anything, folks. So don't hold it against Hunter and Anderson. If you're mad at anybody, be mad at the Ravens offense. Going to the linebacker position where I typically start. Once again, playing only 43 snaps, as you'd expect. Not a whole lot of tackles there. Aziz Al-Shaair left the game early during the blowout, so he only played 88% of the snaps to boot and only had 4 tackles. He did get a pass defense. At the number 2 linebacker, we have another mess. We talked about it last week. This Henry To'oTo'o and EJ Speed, that rotation kind of continued this week with To'oTo'o playing 58% of the snaps and EJ Speed playing 65% of the snaps. EJ Speed actually led the team in tackles with 6, and he got a quarterback hit. To'oTo'o had 5 and had a tackle for loss. I think slowly but surely, EJ Speed is going to take over that number 2 role. Now, I do have a bet with Shawn that I expect Christian Harris to take over for Al-Shaair at some point this year. Unfortunately, maybe I'm wrong because Christian Harris with no injuries reported, was actually on the inactive list. So he didn't even make the game day roster, which was very disappointing to see. But I still think Al-Shaair, who plays aggressively and isn't one of your bigger linebackers, will get injured at some point, and Christian Harris will move into that role. So Ricky's still going to win that bet with Shawn, at least I hope. So that's how I think it's going to play out. Look, there's not much more else to talk about here other than we'll go to safety where MJ Stewart continued to play that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson role. And as we talked about earlier, the Ravens signed Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Texans released him a couple of weeks ago, but MJ Stewart only played 74% of the snaps. He did have 5 tackles, and he did play 59% close to the line of scrimmage, so we like that utilization. But we're not trusting MJ Stewart, folks. And still, Jalen Mills, who's on the practice squad, who was actually elevated on Saturday as one of the 2 practice squad additions for the roster going into the game. Now, Jalen Mills only played 3 snaps, granted, and was the garbage time snaps. But it's still something to watch. I still think Jalen Mills will end up leapfrogging MJ Stewart, so don't bank on MJ Stewart. Okay? Moving to the Colts, who destroyed the Raiders. They played 68 snaps on defense, though, despite that. And Zaire Franklin finished second on the team with tackles with 7. He did get a sack, luckily, to also help us out. He's the only linebacker for the Colts that we can trust. But because of the blowout, he played 81% of the snaps. And that's happened a couple of times this year with the Colts. So kudos to Daniel Jones, Shane Steichen, what they're doing with the offense and how they're getting these big leads and these blowouts. It is certainly hurting our productivity. For those that have been playing IDP for a while, these past couple of years, the Colts have been on the field for 73, 75, 78, 79 snaps, which has really helped to elevate the productivity of your Zaire Franklins, of your EJ Speeds, of your Jalen Carleys late last year, etc. So they're playing, well, they played a little bit more this time, but in general, they've been playing less than the average. And these blowout games are really hurting the number of snaps on the field to get that IDP efficiency for us. Joe Bacci started as the number 2 linebacker, but there was an interesting thing that I saw that I captured here. And according to PFF, Bacci committed 3 penalties and allowed receptions on both passes targeted at him. So I didn't get to watch the whole game, but if that's really what happened, which I don't have any reason to not trust PFF in this particular quote here, that would explain why Bacci only played 28% of the snaps and only had 3 tackles, and why Austin Ajake, Ajiake, if I mispronounce his name, he played 50% of the snaps, and he actually led the team in tackles with 9. Now, Ajake was also in there during garbage time as well, but it looked like he had already replaced Bacci based on the snap count and these penalties and so forth that I was talking about earlier. So we're certainly not playing Bacci this coming week, and we're considering a JK as a deep stash, with one caveat in particular that we got to be careful of. Jalen Carleys, who I just alluded to earlier, is active still to come off of the injured reserve list. Coming into week 5, they did not open his 21-day practice window. We'll see if they do so for week 6, open his 21-day window. I still think it will be at least 2, if not 3 weeks from when he starts practicing before he might get some game time. We'll keep you posted as we hear more. Depending on how deep your league is, maybe you can start stashing Carleys now. But I see none of these folks doing anything that will prevent Carleys from getting onto the field at this point in time. Even though he missed so much of the offseason, he just needs some time to catch up. Hopefully he's been doing the mental reps part at least, and he can physically get there. Okay, at the edge position, once again, because of the blowout, we got to be careful. But at the same time, this rotation has continued for the Colts. Latu played 50% of the snaps, and he played the most of 50%. Elby Khan played 44%. Taekwon Lewis, 43%. Kwity Paye, 41%. JT Tuimoloau, and I butchered the name a little bit, the rookie from Ohio State, the second rounder, he played 38%. Now, of those, Once again, Latu got lucky to get a second interception this year when he dropped into coverage. So great, but those aren't repeatable, folks. He had one tackle otherwise on 50% of the snaps. Just keep that in mind. Ebukon on 44% of the snaps had five tackles and did a sack. So with the sack, as we talked about earlier, you get a sack, you get a quarterback hit, you get a tackle for loss, you get a tackle. Okay, that's great. But we're not trusting Samson Ebukon based on that low snap count to have that kind of productivity, folks. That also talks to some of the issues with the Raiders' offensive tackles, particularly with Colton Miller, their really one good offensive tackle, being out with a high ankle sprain. So Ebukon took advantage of that for sure. And you wish some of the other edge players, now Taquan Lewis did get a sack as well, but you would like to have seen Latu or Pay do something else. Pay got a nada, zero, goose egg, zilch, zippo, you name it kind of thing. Pay did, Quiddy Pay did nothing for us. At the interior defensive line, DeForest Buckner continues to be a stud. At least he played 63% of the snaps, and he did get 6 tackles and a sack. The interior of the Raiders' offensive line is not that great either. So once again, you have defensive tackles going against the Raiders or defensive ends, something to watch for, as long as it doesn't become a blowout game. Nick Cross only played 81% of the snaps. He played 75% close to the line of scrimmage, which is great. Came down from that high of 14 tackles down to 7. But once again, a lot of that was due to playing time. In total, he played only 55 snaps. At the slot position, Mike Hilton went second week in a row. He led off as a slot cornerback. He ended up with a shoulder injury. He was replaced by Chris Lamons, or maybe it's Lamons. I think I've heard it both on TV. Mike Hilton on Tuesday, today, October 7th, got put on injured reserve. So either Lamons or someone else that they pick up moves into that slot role. Also, with Xavier Howard retiring, Mekhi Blackman played the outside cornerback position across from Charvarius Ward. Blackman had 100% of the snaps. He did get an interception to go along with 5 tackles. Is he this year's Jalen Jones for the Colts? We'll keep an eye on that, but right now I'm not quite ready to bank on that. Moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who played the Kansas City Chiefs. They played 64 snaps on Monday night in a very surprising outcome. But that's what happened. And I'm going to start with linebackers, and I'm going to start with Devin Lloyd, who got all kind of kudos, has had now 4 interceptions in the last 4 games, 3 interceptions in the last 2, including, of course, last night, that 99-yard interception for return. But I want y'all to listen to these tackle counts that he's had. 4, 5, 6, 8, 2. Those are the tackle counts that Devin Lloyd has given us in our first 5 games. Great that he's getting all these big plays. And great that he's getting all this kudos and recognition about how great he's playing this year. He's got a fumble recovery as well. Those big plays, particularly these interceptions, are not sustainable, folks, particularly for an inside linebacker. If I have Devin Lloyd, y'all might disagree with me. I am trying to sell high big time. And if I need help at wide receiver or running back, I'm looking to trade for a wide receiver, running back, and then getting a linebacker back. Maybe one of these that we talked about that we like for upside right now, or some of the ones that we see the playing time going up that someone else might have stashed. I'm doing that with Devin Lloyd. I am moving on. Some of y'all might disagree, be interested. Remember, you can put your comments, your questions, your suggestions on the YouTube channel for this show, and Shawn and I will be following up on those. But that's my thoughts on Devin Lloyd. I want to lead with that with Jacksonville. Foye Oluokun, best game of the year from an output perspective with 14 tackles on the 64 snaps, including 7 solo. Oluokun had been one who some of these forced fumbles, fumble recoveries, etc., were boosting his scoring because his tackles had been down. So nice to see him finally getting 14 tackles. Nothing else to talk about at linebackers. Let's go to the edge, where Travon Walker left the game last week in week 5 with a wrist injury, got surgery on Monday. It was a Monday night game. He was listed at questionable, and they said they were taking it to game time. I know I had him in one of my leagues, and I started thinking, do I really want to trust someone who just had surgery 6 or 7 days ago, playing with a club for the first time, and taking a chance that he could be inactive? So I ended up not playing him. I hope none of y'all had him in the lineup. I'm actually a little bit nervous, even though he's on the field. Wrapping up with that club, as we saw Alex Singleton with the Broncos struggling earlier when he had that big club on trying to make tackles, it was hurting his efficiency. Can Walker play with that club? Yes. Can he be as efficient, effective, particularly when you're trying to pull down a quarterback, maybe with one arm in a club, maybe not quite as effective unless you can get a full wrap? I'm not feeling great about playing him. Now, I'm not feeling great about his backups as well. Agba played 63% of the snaps. Emmanuel Agba, that is. He did have a tackle and a quarterback hit. Dewan Smoot played 53% of the snaps. Gave us a big fat goose egg. Zilch, nada, nothing, zippo. Dennis Gardeck, who played like an outside linebacker role / edge role, played 31% of the snaps. He did get 2 tackles and quarterback for hit, but we're not trusting him either. So it's Walker or bust. And right now, I'd like to see Walker do something with that club before I put him into my lineup. And I'm looking at other options, to be honest with you, unless I'm kind of in a desperate situation in a deep league. Nothing to report on the interior defensive line other than Eric Armstead plays 70% of the snaps and continues to do very little with his snaps. At the safety position, Andrew Wingard and Eric Murray both played 100% of the snaps. Eric Murray had 8 tackles. And I highlighted this in my notes because I want to call out, because for most of the game, he was hovering around. It was either like 1 tackle and 2 assists, or 1 solo and 2 assists, or 2 solos and 1 assist, very little. And then in the fourth quarter, he blossomed up to have 5 solo tackles and 3 assists and a pass defense. A lot of that coming on that last drive in particular. So while the output looks great, it certainly didn't feel sustainable. And he played 64% of his snaps deep. So I had him in a league, and it was part of the reason I was paying so close attention, because I had a tight game and I was watching the scoring, and his output, and he was pretty poor. And on ESPN, on the real-time tackles, it just kept on going up and up and up. And the same thing on my fantasy football scoreboard. But that was all in the fourth quarter, and much of it was late in the game. So 8 tackles sounds great. Be very careful. Andrew Wingard only played 58% of the snaps deep. He had 7 tackles, including a quarterback hit. If I had my choice between the two, I'm still playing Wingard over Murray if you have that option. Tyson Campbell had 7 tackles on his 100% of the snaps. Tyson Campbell continues to be someone that gets targeted regularly and is a good tackler. So for as outside cornerbacks go, he's one that, once again, deeper leagues, you could potentially play because he gets targeted a lot, gives up a lot of the catches, and then gets the tackles as well. Travis Hunter, for those that are curious, played 39% of the snaps on defense. He got 2 tackles and 1 pass defense. He played 39 snaps on offense, which was 67% of the snaps. Boy, we talked about it on one of our previous shows. He's hard to trust in lineups right now. He's not doing quite enough on offense. He got lucky on one big pass play that there was 2 other Chiefs around him. It was a little bit of a YOLO ball, quite frankly. They talked about how Trevor Lawrence, he trusted his rookie receiver to go up and get it. He was freaking lucky. You take that catch out, and Hunter really didn't do much on offense. So hard to trust Travis Hunter. Be careful about utilization. Okay? Moving on to the Tennessee Titans. Kaiser White not promoted. Cedric Gray, only 82% of the snaps on the one hand, but a super efficient 12 tackles. Remember, where he struggles has been more in pass coverage than in tackling. That was part of the reason for the whole James Williams situation early in the year. Probably part of the reason they called up Kaiser White as well in that one game where Cedric Gray was basically benched halfway through for Kaiser White. But Cedric Gray right now is someone that we can absolutely trust. And those 12 tackles are fantastic. And he's moved into the league leaders. He's now in the top 10 for tackles in the league, which is fantastic considering he missed half a game. And he's playing about 80% of the snaps, 80 to 85% of the snaps. I'd still trust him putting him into my lineups right now. Cody Barton, on the 68 snaps that Tennessee did play on defense against the Arizona Cardinals, Cody Barton had 6 tackles, 4 solo. Very disappointing. If you have him, okay, he's a linebacker 3 type, not much more than that right now, folks. Probably on the getting towards the mid to lower end 3. That's what to expect from him for the most part. Maybe a little bit more in some games. You hope for 8, but 6 was really bad. Okay. Not much to talk on the edge side at all. We'll skip the edge. We'll just talk about Jeffrey Simmons on the interior, who played 94% of the snaps, had 8 tackles, 2 quarterback hits, 1.5 sacks. He continues to be a monster in defensive tackle required leagues. I've talked about it previously. He's someone I'm trying to trade for at this point, with the caveat that if Tennessee doesn't improve, if you do trade for him, there's a risk that with their poor record, do they sit him out late in the year? Does he get disenchanted? Does he play less snaps, etc.? That's the one risk if you do trade for him. But right now, I wouldn't mind having him in my lineup. At the safety position, continues to be a complete mess, with a rotation of Amani Hooker playing 90% of the snaps, which at least was up from the previous week. Xavier Woods playing 76%. Quandre Diggs playing 56% of the snaps. Hooker played 56% deep. Xavier Woods only played 52% deep, which was unusual for him. And Quandre Diggs played 79% of the snaps deep. And that doesn't even factor in Kevin Winston Jr., who was finally active for a game for the first time. He only played special team snaps, but the more he gets acclimated, the more I expect him to get some time on defense. Once again, as the Titans continue to fall further and further out of the playoff race, I expect Winston to move into this. But with this rotation mess, it's hard to trust Winston as much as I love Winston coming out of college. We're going to have to be very careful. And unless they truly bench some of these others and let Winston play 100%, he will be hard to trust. With a trade of Brownlee to the Jets, Jalen Armour-Davis, who Tennessee picked up off of waivers at cuts to 53-man rosters from Cincinnati, he ended up starting at the other outside cornerback position. And he was someone that was targeted a lot, and he had 9 tackles, 5 of which were solo, and he did get a pass defense. If this continues, he could be one of those outside cornerbacks that could be utilized. But we don't want to rush to get him into our lineups too quick unless you're in the deepest of leagues. We're going to move to the AFC West and talk about Denver. And they only played 61 snaps on defense versus the Eagles. Alex Singleton had 6 tackles is all, but he did get a sack to kind of save his day. He did not get a quarterback hit as part of that, as a side note. Justin Sternard only played 77% of the snaps and had 1 tackle. We've talked about Sternard in past shows. Dre Greenlaw should be back soon. We're punting. Hopefully you've moved on from Sternard. Some of these others that I've already talked about are others too that I will talk about. Use them in Sternard's place, okay? Time to move on for Sternard. If for some reason there's no IR spots on your team and Dre Greenlaw's out there, now might be the time to start picking up Greenlaw, okay? On the edge position, Nick Bonito just continues to be an absolute freaking monster. And we're getting close to talking about him in the same breath as your Myles Garrett and your Nick Boses and your TJ Watts, etc. He is playing that well. 2.5 sacks, 4 tackles in total on 69% of the snaps. Nick Bonito's in your lineup every week, folks. No question. Still love me some Jonathan Cooper, even though he only had 1 tackle and 1 pass defense. I still love Jonathan Cooper, and in most leagues, I see him as a number 2 edge, and I'm playing him just about every weekend where I need to play at least 2 edges. Zach Allen, up to 85% in snaps, probably because it was against the undefeated Eagles, which is great. He had been in the 80% range. He only got us 1 tackle, but we did get 3 quarterback hits out of him and half a sack. And that 1 tackle was an assisted tackle, by the way, which was the half a sack. Watching the game, he was coming oh so close. So I'm not giving up on Zach Allen yet. I think the hustle, having to work with Cooper and Bonito and the attention they draw, etc., not to mention the John Franklin Myers of the world, I think it's going to come for Zach Allen. Don't give up on him yet. Moving to the safety position, Talanoa Hufanga led the team with 7 tackles. Brandon Jones only had 3. Brandon Jones played 65% deep versus Hufanga's 57%. We've seen some alternation between those two throughout the season. Once again, this was only on 61 snaps as well, and we saw how putrid the Eagles' offense was during the game. So it's not like they were successful in a lot of deep throws where the Eagles were. They weren't throwing the ball a lot deep, not playing close to line of scrimmage. When you have people like Singleton, you have Alex Singleton doing well in front of these safeties, productivity is not going to be as good. So we're not giving up on Hufanga or Jones, and we're still playing them as number two safeties, high end two safeties actually. At the slot position, Jaquan McMillan continues to lead there. He played 95% of his snaps close to the line of scrimmage. He played 69% in total. Remember, the Eagles don't play a ton of three wide. Hopefully, you all know that and knew that playing McMillan would be a risk. He had 4 tackles at McMillan. He did get a sack and a pass defense, which might have bailed you out. But always be careful and look for those teams that do play a lot of three wides versus not three wides, and those that play a lot of 2 or 3 tight ends like your Steelers. That tells you a lot about when to play that slot cornerback versus maybe playing a different cornerback, folks. Jahdae Barron only played 16% of the snaps. While I thought the gap was going to close over time from week 1, the gap is actually widening, and McMillan continues to have a substantial lead. Moving to Kansas City, who played Jacksonville on Monday night and played 58 snaps on defense against the Jaguars. Nick Bolton had his best game of the year by far with 12 tackles on those 58 snaps. Of course, I was playing against him, and he had this blowout game, which caused me to lose, which was very disappointing. He also forced a fumble with Trevor Lawrence trying to sneak over from the goal line, trying to do the old Drew Brees thing. Trevor Lawrence is no Drew Brees, and Nick Bolton forced that fumble. And he also had a pass defense to boot. A great game. I'm still not convinced that this Nick Bolton is, if you look at his scoring and his tackles from the first 4 games versus this game, I'm not getting over the moon excited. Let's just say I'm cautiously optimistic at this point in time for Bolton. Drew Tranquill, excuse me, folks, listen to Troy Aikman. You would have thought that he was the best thing since sliced bread, and he seemed to be all over the field. And maybe it was just because Aikman really talked very highly of Tranquill whenever he did something, but he only had 3 tackles, folks, in 1 pass defense. That's what he had. So didn't give us a lot, and that was on 90% of the snaps. So where Bolton and Tranquill kind of sharing tackles, what we saw this week is Bolton having a lot more than Tranquill this week. Yes, Leo Chenal had half a sack. No, we're not chasing him on only 60% of the snaps. George Karlaftis played 76% of the snaps. Once again, gets his half a sack. Charles Omenihu got his first sack of the year. Got 4 tackles, a couple quarterback hits. Great news. He only played 53% of the snaps. Now, once again, there's only 58 snaps that they played on defense against Jacksonville, but let's not chase Omenihu quite yet, folks. He's done this to us before through the years. He'll have a really good game, then he'll disappear for 2 or 3, then he'll have, or maybe 4, then have another good game. Don't fall into the Omenihu trap. Chris Jones, 83% of the snaps, 1 assisted tackle, 1 quarterback hit. That's it. Defensive tackle required leagues. Shawn has indicated he's done with him. It's so hard to let him go because you see what a difference he makes during the game itself, but he's just not contributing for fantasy football. I'd rather have a Zach Allen, Jeffrey Simmons. At this point, I'd take Malik Collins over Chris Jones, folks. Now, as soon as you drop him, he's going to have a good game, but then don't go chasing him again. This is going to be it'll be an outlier. That's what Ricky's feelings are. Move to the secondary. Chamari Connor continues to play 100% of the snaps, continues to be their primary slot cornerback. Has a safety designation, which also helps with him playing so close to the line of scrimmage. 81% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage. 7 tackles, but once again, only 58 snaps. That kind of hindered a little bit of his IDP productivity. Brian Cook played 90% of the snaps, banged up slightly for a little bit, but he did have 6 tackles, and he only played 58% of the snaps deep, which is very different for him. He's usually in the 60s, sometimes the high 60s. So if this continues, that could be good news for Brian Cook because he's not afraid to tackle. Jaden Hicks, only 59% of the snaps. Got that great tackle by the goal line to stop Lawrence from getting in there right before that fumble alluded to earlier that Bolton caused. But can't trust Hicks on 59% of the snaps. Don't let that one play kind of get into your head that, oh, yeah, I need to pick up Hicks. All right, that's the Chiefs. We're going to move on to the Raiders. They played 68 snaps versus the Colts. The big news, and if you joined the show on Sunday morning, the Start Sit show, I talked about the fact how Jermaine Pratt did not make the trip with the Raiders for the game against the Colts. So he was already declared inactive, and it wasn't because of an injury. It was because of something else. Whatever that something else was caused him to be released here on Tuesday, October 7th. So what that meant was Elandon Roberts ended up playing 91% of the snaps. Devin White played 97%. Roberts had only 5 tackles. White only had 5 tackles. The bad news for Devin White is he played 21% of the snaps on the D-line. Not as much as Jermaine Pratt had been playing there. Pratt was in that 27-28 range percent-wise on the line. But that is bad news for Devin White's productivity, folks. We're going to watch that again this week. But if this continues, maybe even now, it might be worth the gamble of trying to trade Devin White for something else. So there's a big tip for you all that I'm really concerned about. Jamal Adams played 53% of the snaps, so a big jump up from 33% roughly to 53%, but he only got 1 assisted tackle. So the productivity that we had been seeing on limited snaps where he's getting like 4 tackles on, 30-ish, 33%, 28% of the snaps did not materialize with him getting more snaps. Haven't been able to study his utilization yet, but let's not chase Jamal Adams, even if he's listed as a safety in your whatever league you're in, playing linebacker. We're not chasing that right now. Max Crosby, 93% of the snaps, seems to be all over the field. Did get 3 tackles, quarterback hit, pass defense, but no sacks again. I saw another report online, I believe it was Tom Kislingberry, who talked about how inefficient Max Crosby is on his pass rushes. So what's driving his pressure count up is the fact that he's on the field so much. He's not being very efficient for the number of snaps he's playing. So we do love Max Crosby, but this is something to watch if these pressures are not translating into sacks. I was thinking about trading for him in one league, but I've decided I'm going to wait before I make an offer to my league mate to see if this trend continues here. Malcolm Kuntz only 46% snaps, Tyree Wilson 32%, etc. So nothing there to talk about, folks. On the defensive secondary, Jeremy Chin led the team with 10 tackles, played 97% close to the line of scrimmage, so we finally got some of that tackle efficiency that we're hoping for. He played 70% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage. That playing close to the line of the scrimmage finally translated to the tackles we're looking for. But Chin has been inconsistent. Jeremy Chin has certainly been inconsistent. Don't get too super excited. Don't go out try and trade for him and buy high. But if you have him, he's someone we're playing because of that utilization. But know this is on the higher side of what you're going to see, particularly with 68 snaps being played. Okay, let's move on to the LA Chargers to wrap up the AFC. The Chargers played only 59 snaps on defense against the Commanders. And the big news, I alluded to it earlier, is Odafe Oweh was traded from the Baltimore Ravens to the Los Angeles Chargers. He does have a pretty decent pass rush win rate, which they certainly need. I had highlighted before this trade happened in my notes to walk you all through the number of tackles and the number of quarterback hits and sacks that the edge players had for the Chargers in this game against the Commanders. They had a total of 2 tackles, both of which were assisted tackles, not solo. One was from Caleb Murphy, and one was from Cleveland Farrell, who was called up from the practice squad from this game. That was it. On quarterback hits and sacks, across those 4, they had a total of 0 Goose egg, nada, zilch, nothing out of those four. So you could see why they needed that to happen, that trade to happen, that is, and to get some additional pass rush and some productivity. I warned everybody last week about Tuli Tui Pelotu. Do not get too excited about him. He had 0 sacks going into the game last week. He had 4 sacks in that game. And I warn you all, don't chase those 4 sacks. And what happened? Not only did he have no sacks, he had no tackles, no pass defense, nothing. So he's kind of middle of the road from a pass rush win rate. Don't trust him. And while I'm excited that Owe is going to go to the Chargers and he should get more playing time, I think that'll reduce Bud Dupree. Some Caleb Murphy will probably see a reduction. Farrell will probably eventually end up on the active roster, being the veteran that he is, and he'll bump up from the 29% he played maybe like to 35% or so. Owe is someone to watch. We're not going to pick up. Maybe with this playing opportunity, maybe he gets a sack or two, but that's about all we're going to get out of Owe. So don't go chasing it, but that's the edge story for the Chargers right now. Moving to the defensive tackle position, there's a huge change in playing time that I just wanted to call out more from a watch perspective. Second year player Justin Eboigbe, I think is how it's pronounced, Eboigbe, the rookie out of, excuse me, second year player out of Alabama, jumped all the way to 71% of the snaps with 4 total tackles and a sack. His snap count has gone up percentage-wise from 16 to 20 to 23 to 36, now 71. There's no other injuries that occurred along the defensive line. So this is just they've been watching him. It's like, okay, they said, we're going to give him more opportunity. And he came through. Now, am I rushing to spend a bunch of fab dollars on him? No. In a very deep league, do I consider stashing him in my last spot on my roster? Maybe. Others, I think we're just going to want to watch for at least another week or two. The Otto Ogbonanya, I always have trouble with his name. His snap count went from 30% to 000 from weeks 2 through 4, and then back up to 41%. Didn't really have any stats, but he did have that jump up. Now, part of the reason both he and Eboigbe might have played more snaps is because Deshaun Hand only played 4 snaps, only played 7% of the snaps. As a result, left the game with a groin injury. Groin injuries and not return to a game, that's usually not a great sign that he'll play the following week as well. That could be also contributed to the playing time of these two. But if Eboigbe plays like he did and has that productivity, and once again, they gave him 71%, Tart had 53%, Caldwell 51%, Ogbanya 41%. They could have distributed more than they did, and they left Eboigbe in there quite a bit more. So once again, keep an eye on him, but disappointing for Deshaun Hand in the very deepest of leagues because he's been a solid rotational defensive tackle for fantasy football purposes at that interior defense tackle position. Derwin James, very disappointing stat line with only 3 tackles playing 100% of the snaps. He did play 93% close to the line of scrimmage. So it's just one of those games where it didn't work out for him, folks. I talked about the trade away of Aloy Gilman earlier in the show when I talked about the Ravens. But in this game, what was interesting is Gilman played 73% of the snaps. Tony Jefferson played 27%. Add those two together, you get 100. So there's a little bit of a rotation there. Jefferson has played well. Harbaugh has talked very highly of him, and you could see they were already trying to work him into the playing time, and then they go ahead and trade Gilman away to pick up Owe. Now, Elijah Moden was active, and he did play 53% of the snaps. He played 65% of those deep. Gilman and Jefferson played in the 80% range, with Gilman at 81, Jefferson all the way at 88% deep. So, what does that say about Moden and Jefferson as they replace Gilman? We're going to stay away from playing either one of those two this week. We're still going to play Derwin James, but we're going to see how this shakes out. And Tony Jefferson, particularly if he gets more towards the 60% deep and 40% close to the line of scrimmage, he's demonstrated he can be very productive even with that amount percentage of playing deep. So let's see how it shakes out between him and Molden. But this could be interesting that even though they gave Molden that big 3-year contract, that Jefferson plays more of the Gilman role and plays close to 100% of the snaps still. And that could end up being good for Jefferson in your deeper safety leagues. Tarheeb still only played 85% of the snaps. Haven't seen any kind of injury report of why that was the case. Did not see him going out of the game at any point. I did not get to watch the whole game, though. But he did play only 54% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage. That of what he did play. So Tarheeb still, we talked about last week, we can give up on him and find other cornerbacks to play. Now we're going to move to the NFC and the Dallas Cowboys. And I'm going to take a sip of water, folks. All righty. They played 81 snaps on defense against the Jets. You expect a hell of a lot of productivity on 81 snaps. Kenneth Murray, who went to the game with a ankle injury, I believe it was, from the previous game, but he was cleared to play, took him off the injury report. He played 100% of the snaps. On 81 snaps, he only had 5 tackles, of which only 1 was solo, 4 was assisted. He did get a quarterback hit in the pass defense, but that's just pretty embarrassing production, folks. That is the 4th week in a row, I'm pretty sure my numbers are correct here, that while he played 100% of the snaps in the second linebacker for the Cowboys, whoever that's been, that second linebacker has had more tackles than Murray, even though Murray's played 100% of the snaps and they've played in the 80% range. Jack Sanborn was the number 2 linebacker this week. He played 20% of the snaps, then he left with a concussion. And Shamar James was the person that came in to play that number 2 role, not Maris Lufau, but Shamar James. On the broadcast, they talked about how the Cowboys coaches had talked to the commentators about they needed to get Lufau in the lineup. He makes things happen. He did have 4 tackles. He did force a fumble, which is great. But for all that hoopla that the commentators talked about, he only played 26% of the snaps, did Lufau. Shamar James is really the one that took over for Sanborn when he went out. And Shamar James had 15 tackles, of which 8 were solo. Now that's on 73% of the snaps. Now that's some freaking productivity. Now, was he running up and stuffing things at the line of scrimmage? No, he was not. He's on the smaller side. He's speedy. He needs to bulk up some and get stronger. But hustling all over the field like a maniac to get those 15 tackles. If Sanborn is out, if he doesn't clear concussion protocol, I would be willing to take the chance on playing Shamar James as a number 3 linebacker, not as a number 2 or 1, even though he had 15. Remember, that was on 81 snaps. Is that going to repeat another week? I'm not so sure about that 81 snaps. So that's quite an outlier. But I'd be willing to take a chance as a number 3 linebacker, maybe a mid to low 3 for Shamar James. But I could see him doing what Sanborn does. So maybe I'm being a little bit too easy on him. Maybe he could be a high end 3 like a Sanborn is. Okay. At the edge position, okay, so we did have quite a bit of productivity, which was great. So if you look, they had 5 players between the defensive end and the defensive tackle position that recorded at least half a sack. They had 6 players between edge and defensive tackle that had a quarterback hit, including Dante Fowler having 5 quarterback hits to go with a sack in a pass defense at all. But when you look at these playing times, Izuruku, the rookie, this week, he had the most snaps with 57%. None of the other edge players played more than 50%. Sam Williams, 47%. Dante Fowler, despite all that productivity, only 42% of the snaps. Javian Clowney, 38%. James Houston, who they're pretty much using as a designated pass rusher on very, very obvious passing situations, only played 32%. So even though he had 1.5 sacks, boy, unless you get There's one league that on the start sit show, they told us that they get 15 points for a sack. If you're in one of those leagues, holy cow, yeah, take a chance on James Houston. Outside of that, you're probably not playing James Houston. Hard to play any of these folks from a rotation perspective. And none of them had more than 3 tackles, as a side note. So that's where we are on the Cowboys' edge right now. And it was the Jets' O line, and it was 81 snaps, and it was Justin Fields who, outside of the garbage time, we love garbage time for fantasy football and offense, but outside the garbage time, really struggled for the Jets this past week. Also, Digasula did have a sack and a couple of tackles, but on 58% of the snaps, folks, as a side note. Okay. With Malik Hooker going to IR, Wanye Thomas had 100% of the snaps playing in place of Malik Hooker and had 10 tackles, second on the team to Shamar James. So basically, 2 tackles were the leading tackler. 2 backups were the leading tacklers for the Cowboys. Donovan Wilson finished with 8 tackles. But from a deep perspective, Wanye played 80% of the snaps deep. Donovan Wilson played 72% of the snaps deep. It was almost as if they were saying, Justin Fields, you're not going to beat us deep to Garrett Wilson. You're going to have to prove you can be accurate on the short to intermediate throws and move a team down the field. And quite frankly, except for garbage time, he couldn't do it, unfortunately. So that's how it appeared that they played things. But luckily, still with that, Wilson and Thomas were able to come up and make tackles on the stuff that was in front of them and made them very productive this past week. I'm comfortable playing Wilson if Thomas continues to play exactly that hooker role. Probably shouldn't count on those 10 tackles, folks. Look at Malik Hooker's previous stats. That's what you should realistically expect for Wanye Thomas as well. And when I say I can trust Donovan Wilson to play, that's more of a safety 3. Okay? Deron Bland did start playing more in the slot this week. He did like Dax Hill, like we talked about earlier, started on the outside and then would move to the inside in 3 wide situations, which was fantastic. That's the Deron Bland we love. Kyrie Elam, as a side note, was all the way down to 42% of the snaps. And when Reddy Stewart was on the field, he played on 32% of the snaps, and he played all of those basically in the slot as well. But that was more in 4 wide situations. Okay. Moving on to the New York Giants. They played the Saints, who, wow, it's saying something that the Saints beat the Giants. 66 snaps is what the Giants played against the Saints. Bobby Okereke led the team with 10 tackles, 5 solo, did nothing else, but 10 tackles, very solid line for Okereke this past week. Darius Musa returned from the concussion eye injury. He had a Micah McFadden type of line, played only 70% of the snaps, but did have 9 tackles, 6 of which were solo and a tackle for loss. So we saw McFadden be productive in that second linebacker role for the Giants, even playing 75% of the snaps or so. He usually played a little bit more than 70% that Musa played. So in your deeper leagues, that second linebacker role for the Giants has proven that it can be somewhat productive. So you could take a chance in, once again, deeper leagues of playing Musa as like a linebacker 4 and hopefully getting 7 or 8 tackles out of him, not much more than that. The shocking stat for me was that for the Giants and the triumphant, the triumphant 3 of Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau, those 3. Whereas the week before, they had 12 quarterback hits in their victory, their one victory of the year. This week, against Spencer Rattler, they had goose egg combined of quarterback hits, which means they obviously had no sacks as well. They did nothing, which was shocking against the Saints team. Now, maybe the Saints, the rookie Kelvin Banks, and the right tackle from Oregon State, Fauga, maybe they are doing a fantastic job, and maybe that's what it is, which is great for the Saints, but very disappointing to see that they did nothing against the Saints. I'm going to attribute this to an outlier, particularly even Brian Burns. At least Burns gave us 3 tackles. Abdul Carter had 4 tackles. Kayvon Thibodeau, despite his name and reputation, Of the three, he played the least amount of snaps now. Burns played 83%, Carter 70%, Thibodeau down to 62%. He only had one tackle. It was a tackle for loss. But we're starting to see a little bit of shifting of the guard with Carter overtaking Thibodeau. And Thibodeau's pass rush win rate stats have not been good historically. So, he's another one that I expect to be traded at some point during the year before the trade deadline. That's Ricky's opinion. Okay. Dexter Lawrence only played 47% of the snaps. I continue to tell you all I'm worried about injuries. On top of that, he fought an illness. They talked about the illness during the game. That could have contributed to his low snap count as well, but he's just not producing. I'm not ready to cut him loose for defensive tackle required leagues, but I'm certainly looking to bench him until I see more. Newman and Holland were both on the injury report from a safety perspective. They both played 100% of the snaps. Holland ended up playing 71% deep. The good news, Newman played 52% close at line of scrimmage, something we've been hoping to see more of. We got that, but he only had 5 tackles, unfortunately. Holland only had 2. So Holland at 71%, not trusting him, folks, going into next week. Drew Phillips only played 65% of the snaps. He had 3 tackles. 95% of the snaps were close to the line of scrimmage. Now, Shawn heard that he had an ankle injury. I didn't see or hear that. So something to keep an eye out for the Giants injury report. I don't think I saw that when I was looking earlier, but I didn't check for that specifically since they played the Thursday night game against the Eagles. So, but once again, the Eagles don't play a lot of 3 wide, so we're benching Drew Phillips this coming week either way. Okay, sit Drew Phillips, find you another cornerback. Moving on to the Eagles, who played 74 snaps against the Broncos. Zach Bond, 12 tackles. Jihad Campbell, 11 tackles, the 2 leading tacklers on the team. Great game for Zach Bond. He got a sack and a couple of quarterback hits to boot. He did play. He being Jihad Campbell played only 15% of the snaps on the defensive line, which was down a bit. But as we talked about last week, Nakobe Dean has been, on the 21-day window has been open for him. He practiced in full all week long on this quote short week. Now, some of these are estimations because they didn't really practice, or they're doing walkthroughs because they just had the game and then they play on Thursday night. But he was listed as a full participant. We warned previously, and I'm going to warn again for those that missed it. I really feel in my gut, and Shawn said he couldn't argue with what I was saying, that Nakobe Dean's going to move back into his old role, where next to Zach Bond, and you're going to start seeing Campbell more on the edge. Now, do I think it's going to start as a platoon and that Dean will be eased in? Yes, I do. But I think with their lack of pass rush, this week they did get 2 sacks, but one of those did come from Zach Bond. Okay, there was only one that came, and it was earlier in the game by Zadarius Smith. Other than that, there was no other sacks. This team, Philadelphia, needs some pass rush help. Jihad Campbell, they're going to start grooming him to do more of that, is Ricky's opinion. And so that productivity again for tackles from Campbell is going to disappear the more he moves to the edge. Sell high on Campbell is my recommendation. I hope I'm not wrong, but that's what Ricky's crystal ball is saying. If you look at the edge position, Jalix Hunt played 58% of the snaps. No other edge played more than 50%. Nolan Smith, remembers, on injured reserve, but even before he went on injured reserve, he wasn't doing much. It's just not a good situation. Ojulari jumped up to 46% of the snaps. He did at least have 3 tackles, and he did get 1 quarterback hit, but he's not stout enough to play against the run. Zadarius Smith was up to 46% as well. He got that 1 sack. He did get 3 tackles as well. Still not playing him as well. We're just staying away from all these other edge folks, on all these edge players for the Eagles. Jalen Carter played 91% on the interior. Had 4 tackles and a quarterback hit. Only one of those was solo, which isn't necessarily surprising on the interior of the line, with that there'd be 3 assisted tackles. Jordan Davis, his snap count was down to 55%, so it's come down from 68 to 54 to 55 the last 3 weeks. He only had 2 tackles. While I was excited about Jordan Davis a couple of weeks ago, my excitement is kind of kind of going significantly downhill. I'll just leave it at that. I'm hoping they give him more playing time. Moro Ojimo, 51% of snaps, 4 tackles. Still have hopes for him for the future, but just not yet. I'm not rostering him except in the deepest of leagues. Andrew Makuba played 100% of the snaps at safety. He played 74% deep. Blankenship played his typical around 80% deep. Makuba was the full-time starter. He did get 6 tackles. Once again, that's on 74 snaps. Hard to be trusting of that when you're playing that much deep. Sorry, folks. And Cooper DeJean, once again, 100% of the snaps with 89% close to the line of scrimmage. Last thing I'll mention, Keely Ringo at cornerback was the he started and played opposite of Quinion Mitchell. Adoree Jackson only played 1 snap during the game. Okay, so for those in the deepest of leagues that are maybe hoping that that number 2 cornerback will pan out and be someone that gets targeted regularly across from Quinion Mitchell, it's just you can't rely on it, folks. Moving to the Commanders, who played 67 snaps against the Chargers. Bobby Wagner had 14 tackles to lead the team. Continues to be quite the monster. He had 1 quarterback hit. Frankie Louvu, we warned you this last week. He had a very productive game, but we said that's going to be the Louvu. You're going to get 1 every 3, 4, 5 games. Well, came back to earth with playing 99% of the snaps, only had 4 tackles, play 41% of the snaps on the defensive line. That's the risk with Louvu, particularly if he doesn't get any sacks, which he didn't get in this game, which it felt like everybody was getting to the backfield against the Chargers because, Slater's been out for the year at offensive tackle. Joe Alt is out with a high ankle sprain. Mekhi Beckman, the right guard, left for part of the game. Just an ugly situation for the Chargers, which I think contributed to the Washington productivity. So while I'm still throwing to Dorrance Armstrong had 2 sacks and 3 tackles, if you're going to try and trade for him, don't overtrade because some of this is an unusual anomaly, folks. Don't go chasing that necessary for Armstrong. He only played 45% of the snaps as a side note. Okay? Yes, Von Miller had 1.5 sacks. Once again, the Chargers line was struggling. It's easy for a veteran like Von Miller to take advantage of it. He only played 43% of the snaps. Be careful about chasing these numbers for the Commanders. Great if you played them, though. Okay? Moving to the secondary. The big news is about Quan Martin. He and Jeremy Reeves, both played 100% of the snaps. Quan Martin had 9 tackles. Jeremy Reeves had 7, which is great for both. But what's interesting is Martin played 48% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage. Jeremy Reeves played 46% close to the line of scrimmage. If you go back and listen to 2 shows back, when I talked about the Will Harris injury, you'll hear me talk about the fact there are several options I threw out there. One of those options that I threw out there was, would they move Jeremy Reeves more to a free safety role and move Quan Martin to that Will Harris role? That somewhat happened during this game. And quite frankly, with his physicality and athleticism, and Reeves has typically been more of a free safety special teamer than a close to the box safety, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Quan Martin doing more of that. So, do that being more close to the line of scrimmage and Reeves being more deep. Something to keep an eye on. Quan Martin, if you're in a trade negotiation and they have Quan Martin, maybe you can get him thrown in as part of the package. I'm kind of getting thumbs up, trending upward on Quan Martin, but let's see another week what happens, okay? Mikey Sainristil was a slot cornerback for Washington, played 82% of the snaps, 96% of the slotted box, gave you a great game with 9 tackles as well. That is your Commanders. Okay, now moving to the NFC North, where the Chicago Bears will be on bye. Early practice reports as they come out of bye, TJ Edwards was on the practice field. Kyler Gordon was on the practice field. And that's probably bad news for Noah Sewell, folks. And that's also Nick McLeod, who had been playing the slot cornerback position. That's probably bad news for him. So for those of you that might have been trying to milk that with McLeod, hopefully you weren't. But if you were, Gordon and Edwards look like they're going to be back for this upcoming game. Moving on to the Lions, who played only 62 snaps against the Cincinnati Bengals. Jack Campbell, phenomenal game, 100% of the snaps, and then the team with 11 tackles. Anzalone played 100% of the snaps next to him. Now, as we've been seeing, Anzalone's been low on the tackle count, with only 3, but he had 3 pass defensive interception to kind of bail you out. Derek Barnes playing 94% of the snaps, playing kind of combination of an off-ball linebacker slash edge player. He had 8 tackles. Once again, he's been very productive. So he's in one of these types of roles as a third linebacker that's playing a lot of snaps, that's getting used in the right way enough, even though he's playing a decent amount on the edge, that you can potentially play him in your deeper leagues. He did get a sack, which included a safety, which actually jumped his points up even further. So great for Derek Barnes. So someone you can use in deeper leagues. And if Anzalone gets hurt and he moves into that role, even more giddy up, thumbs up for your Derek Barnes. Okay, we had an Al-Qadim Muhammad sighting this week. He played up to 66% of the snaps. So I think the week before, when we teased and joked about him, how we said don't go chasing off of that really great game he had the week before that. And he pretty much did nothing, but he only played like 38% of the snaps, did Al-Qadim Muhammad. He comes back this week up to 68, so his ankle must be doing better. 66. His ankle must be doing better. And he did get 2 tackles, but just as importantly, he got 3 quarterback hits. I caution, this was the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line. This was Jake Browning. So once again, still don't get too excited about plugging him back into your lineup with those numbers. But at least it's a start, and we can feel a little bit better about that kind of playing time. Aiden Hutchinson was an absolute beast. 5 quarterback hits to go along with his 4 tackles and a sack. And he had a strip sack taken away as well, on top of this as well. He is an absolute monster. We're playing Hutchinson. Right now, I'd have to say, out of Myles Garrett, him, Nick Bosa, I know Bosa's injured, etc., TJ Watt, Crosby, Hutchinson is the number 1 dynasty edge player in Ricky's opinion. Okay, moving to the safety position. Kirby Joseph played 66% of the snaps deep. We were worried if he was going to play, but he did play. Brian Branch played 69% of the snaps deep as well. Was that because they were protecting against Jamar Chase? Was that because they were playing more too deep because of all the injuries at cornerback? DJ Reed was out injured. Terrion Arnold left the game injured. By the way, on Terrion Arnold, they talked originally. They thought he'd be out for the year. His second opinion says maybe he won't be out for the year, but he'll probably go on IR and miss at least 4 weeks. So that's the story on Terrion Arnold. But with those cornerback injuries, it's concerning and worrisome that do they start playing Branch and Joseph both deep to protect against that? So they play some too deep safety, trying to keep things in front of them and maybe even help those cornerbacks out. The Rock Yassines of the world, the Meek Robertsons, who's much better suited as a slot cornerback, but is going to have to play more on the outside. He ended up playing 68% out wide this past week. Trey Flowers, who they called up from the practice squad this past week, had to play 78% on the outside after the Terrion Arnold injury, and he was actually playing some of that before the Arnold injury. So the cornerback situation, once again, a mess for the Detroit Lions. Brian Branch is a serious risk, folks. I'm not saying to sit him, but just know that this change in playing time can seriously hurt, not playing time, playing location can seriously hurt his productivity. Moving to the Green Bay Packers, who were also on bye. No news to report on the Packers at this point in time. Moving to the Vikings, who played 70 snaps against the Browns and Dylan Gabriel. Eric Wilson led the team with 9 tackles, which was great, 100% of the snaps. Ivan Pace was all the way down to 69% of the snaps. We warned everyone about this. He may have bailed you out with that sack, but he only had 4 tackles. In addition, it was reported that Cashman, the inside linebacker who's on injured reserve, the reason that Eric Wilson has been playing 100% of the snaps, Cashman, when Minnesota comes out of this upcoming bye, is going to start practicing per head coach Kevin O'Connell. This looks like the end of the ride for Eric Wilson until Cashman potentially gets hurt again, which he's been known to do. As a side note, Cashman is very injury prone. And I still think we're going to see Ivan Pace in that 69-70% range as the Vikings and the secondary has continued to get healthy, which we'll talk about in a moment. Now, what's not healthy is Andrew Van Ginkel, who has that neck injury, ended up missing the game, came back, played 8 snaps, left with the neck injury, missed this game again against the Browns. Now they're going into the bye week. It'll be interesting to see coming out of the bye week if Andrew Van Ginkel practices. Dallas Turner played 93% of the snaps, and with that, he had 7 tackles, including a tackle for loss. So very efficient, but not getting the pass rush success that we would like. So if Van Ginkel continues to be out, if Turner plays this many snaps, I think we can count on him for tackles, but I'm not so sure that we can count on him for the bigger plays. Grenard had 2 pass defenses. As a side note, I'm not very tall and I'm a little bit shorter than Dylan Gabriel, folks. I don't know if you saw the Dylan Gabriel Carson Wentz shaking hands after the game. The stark difference in their heights, it was incredible. If Dylan Gabriel was 5'11", I'm 6'8", which I'm clearly not. But anyway, I digress. So expect when teams are playing the Browns, a lot of pass defenses from your defensive linemen, hopefully. Okay. At defensive tackle, Javon Hargrave, for some reason, only played 47% of the snaps. Now, remember, a couple of weeks ago, he was battling an injury. I haven't seen injury reports, and of course, they're going to bye. I didn't see any injuries that caused him not to play that much. Something to keep an eye on coming out of the bye for those of you that have been playing him in defensive tackle required leagues. We're not chasing Levi Drake Rodriguez and the 6 tackles that he had, as a side note. Coming to the secondary, which I alluded to earlier, what seems to be happening with Harrison Smith is they rotate him in when they go to these 3 safety looks. Theo Jackson and Josh Metellus are playing 100% of the snaps. With the good news that Josh Metellus playing 70% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage. Theo Jackson played 64% deep. When Harrison Smith did play, he played 62% of the deep, which further enabled Metellus to play close to the line of scrimmage. Unfortunately, Metellus only had 4 tackles, which was a little bit disappointing. Theo Jackson somehow had 8 tackles playing from that deep safety position. Now, 7 of those were assisted, only 1 was solo. So to his credit, I guess he was coming up to help on tackles, which is great, but we're not going to count on 8 tackles, 7 of which were assisted from Theo Jackson on a week-to-week basis with the deep safety position he's been playing so much of this year. Okay? That's the Vikings. The Falcons were also on bye. As a reminder, Caden Ellis was being used on the edge on the defensive line quite a bit, which was hurting his productivity from a tackles perspective. So as we alluded to with Giad Campbell and Jermaine Pratt previously and Devin White now and things along those lines. So Caden Ellis, we're going to keep an eye. I'm still in the boat that I'd be trying to trade Caden Ellis, to be honest, folks. So that's all we're going to talk about Atlanta today. Let's go to Carolina, who only had to play 55 snaps on defense against Miami. Big change at the linebacker position in a couple of different ways. One is, while we've been very down on Trevin Wallace, apparently they were so unhappy with Christian Roseboom with the green dot that, or because of the way they've been playing, they just decided to give Trevin Wallace the shot with the green dot. But Wallace played 100% of the snaps with the green dot. The bad news is you would have thought he only played 50% of the snaps because he only had 4 tackles, 2 of which were solo. That's all he did. Now, Christian Roseboom only played 69% of the snaps, but he had 9 tackles. So that's sort of what we've been expecting out of Roseboom. You know, like 6 solos and 3 assists. This week it was 5 solos and 4 assists, but he did it this week on 69% of snaps. Maybe not having to wear the green dot and not having to be worried about others and so forth is great for Roseboom. He has worn the green dot in the past, though, but for some reason that might have helped. Maybe it's just with the Dolphins scheme. Whatever it was, Roseboom, 9 tackles on 69% of the snaps. Now, am I trusting to go shove Trevin Wallace into my lineup? Absolutely not. Was this a one-week experiment that with Wallace only having 4 tackles, they decided, hey, they decide to flip it back for their next game? That is highly possible. I'd still rather play Roseboom over Wallace. It would have to be a deep league for me to play Wallace. Now, if this continues for a second week in a row, maybe we'll revisit it. But with the numbers Wallace is putting up in Roseboom, if it continues this way, I don't think it'll change. So that's the linebacker position for the Panthers. At the edge position for the Panthers, Pat Jones played 69% of the snaps. He got a lucky sack. Other than that, he did nothing. Nick Skirton played the second most at 60%. He had 4 tackles, 3 of which were assisted, but at least he did something better than some of his previous lines. DJ Wanham was down to 47%, so a little bit of a warning there. Now, he was coming off an injury, so we want to be careful of maybe that's the reason why. And he was limited as he came back in. But DJ Wanham, those using him in deep leagues, we haven't really been trusting to begin with. This is further reason not trusting. Great news on the Derek Brown and Ashawn Robinson front, that 82% of the snaps for Derek Brown, Ashawn Robinson 75% of the snaps. They both had a sack, which is fantastic, and they both had 3 tackles. If they kind of get that kind of utilization, by the way, that was only on 55 snaps. Okay, so that's some good news, something we want to keep an eye on for both of those two. At the safety position, while Scott and Morig both played 100% of the snaps, and Morig played a fantastic 89% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage, and he did have 7 tackles and 3 tackles for loss. That's what we want to see for Trevor Morig. That's exciting, particularly on only 55 snaps that they played. Lathan Ransom played up to 65% of the snaps, the most snaps he's played so far. He had 5 tackles. Now, Shaw Smith-Wade, the normal nickel cornerback, was out of the game with an injury. Corey Thornton played only 44% of the snaps. So there's a little bit both Corey Thornton and Lathan Ransom getting in there as like that 5th defensive back for the Panthers. But also, this has given the Panthers an opportunity to get Lathan Ransom more playing time to eventually replace Nick Scott at some point this year, in Ricky's opinion. By the way, Nick Scott played 84% of the snaps deep, as a side note. So even if Ransom moves into that Scott role and he plays that much deep, it's going to be hard to trust him. At least he's a better tackler than Nick Scott. So maybe he could get us 6 tackles in a game. But be careful if you hear Ransom is replacing Scott. I think it'll happen, but we still need to be careful. Moving to the New Orleans Saints, who won their first game of the year, which I was excited and shocked. 73 snaps played against the Giants. This Pete Werner thing is driving me crazy. This week he was back up to 88% of the snaps after being at basically 70% the week before. And on those 88% of the snaps, led the team in tackles with 11. So when he's getting the playing time, he's getting the productivity. When he's not, he's not getting as much productivity. The question is, haven't been able to figure out the pattern yet of when he's getting those snaps. Play him as a linebacker 4 and know there's good upside, and you should have a decent floor for him. Maybe even a linebacker 3, maybe kind of thing. That's how I feel about him. Demario Davis continues to have a solid year, 100% of the snaps, including forcing a fumble. Carl Granderson, 96% of the snaps. Cam Jordan at his advanced age, 86% of the snaps. Granderson had a great game with 6 tackles, a quarterback hit, and he absolutely got freaking robbed of a sack / quarterback hit / tackle for loss / tackle on the Giants' last drive. How they called that roughing the passer on Jackson Dart, I have no idea. If you haven't seen, try and find it on X or on YouTube. He got absolutely robbed. We love us some Carl Granderson. Do I expect him to play 96% of the snaps going forward? No, but low 80s for sure. And he loved Carl Granderson as a number 2 edge, folks. Chase Young, out again with that same calf injury, 5 weeks now. He could have gone on IR, and they could have had someone else on the roster. They butchered the handling of that. I'm sure he's been telling them, yeah, I'll be fine. Yeah, I'll be fine. And no, he hasn't been. Chase Young will eventually cut into the snap count of both Granderson and Jordan. We'll see what the practice reports say this week. Nothing to talk about on the interior of the defensive line for the Saints. Brian Bresee, great that he forced a fumble. It was a big play in the game. As a Saints fan, fantastic, but we're not chasing him, even though he played 63% of the snaps. At the safety position, Justin Reed suffered a concussion very early in the game, Jordan Howden came in as his replacement. Jordan Howden played close to the box, close to the line of scrimmage, in the box and in the slot, etc., similar to how Justin Reed did. But at least Howden gave us some productivity with 4 tackles, 3 of which were solo, and of course he had the fumble recovery that he returned for the touchdown. Not great numbers for 82% of the snaps on 73 snaps. So maybe it's the utilization that's impacting Reed and Howden in terms of getting those IDP stats for us, even with that use close to the line of scrimmage. Even if Reed's out, I'm not chasing Howden because, as I was just alluding to, that specific spot just isn't giving us IDP stats, and we don't want the fumble recovery and the TD to skew us. We're looking for that tackle floor, and that tackle floor is pretty low for Justin Reed / Jordan Howden. Alontae Taylor had 8 tackles. I just want to call it out because he did what we were kind of hoping for, where he started on the outside, and when they went to 3 wide, he moved to that slot position. Kool-Aid McKinstry, who had 2 interceptions and who we're not going to chase, by the way, was the other outside starting cornerback. And when they went to 3 wide, when Taylor went inside, Quincy Riley moved to that outside cornerback spot, the rookie. Isaac Yiadom missed the game due to a hamstring injury. Alontae Taylor ended up playing 70% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage. So great news for Alontae Taylor usage. Let's hope that that continues. Moving on to Tampa Bay. 60 snaps played against the Seahawks in a really fun and exciting game, particularly if you like offense. I do like my defense. I do like my IDP, but that was a fun game. Levante David had a comeback in terms of tackles, did much better than he had been producing, having 9 tackles. He also got an interception late in the game, which set up the game-winning field goal, which was fantastic. Still not overly trusting him, not bumping him up to the high number ones that he used to be, but at least can kind of feel good playing him. But Seattle has been good about giving up tackles and stats to linebackers, so just keep that in mind. Servacio Dennis also had 8 tackles for Tampa Bay. In my notes, I have this for the edge rushers for the Tampa Bay Bucks. Hassan Reddick, Yaya Diaby, Anthony Nelson, Chris Braswell. Among the 4 of them, they had 2 quarterback hits only, 1 for Reddick, 1 for Diaby, no sacks. Now, Sam Darnold's doing a phenomenal job. The Seattle offensive line, other than their right guard, has been doing much better than expected this year. So they did a great job protecting Sam Darnold, but disappointing that we didn't get much out of Reddick or Diaby. Not giving up on Diaby yet, folks. At the safety position, Antoine Winfield and Tyke Smith both played 97% of the snaps. Now, there was those cornerback injuries we talked about. So we saw Antoine Winfield only play 59% deep, and Tyke Smith did play 57% deep. So he played a little bit more deep than he had been. I was worried about this with the injuries, with Jamel Dean being out with the hip injury, with Benjamin Morrison being out with a hamstring injury. So Zion McCullum played the outside cornerback on one spot. Jacob Parrish, as we talked about would probably happen, actually moved to outside cornerback. We talked about that as being one of the options. We were worried that it would be Tyke Smith. At least that didn't happen to Tyke Smith. But Parrish played outside, and then he did move into the slot when it was a 3 wide situation. Kendall Vilder, who played 55% of the snaps, he ended up playing outside corner when Parrish went inside. So they did play a little bit more too deep to a certain degree with Tyke Smith because of the cornerback injuries. Once again, Ricky's opinion, and that could be wrong. But Tyke Smith only had 6 tackles, and I think that was partly a result of this utilization. Okay? All right, I kind of butchered that description. Sorry about that, but let's go ahead and move on to Arizona, who played 67 snaps against the Tennessee Titans, which, how in the world they lost that game, I will never know. That's got to be, in history, one of the worst losses, blown games in the history of professional football. Okay, I'll stop there because we're not talking about team defenses. We're talking about IDP. Mack Wilson played 100% of the snaps, only had 6 tackles. That's oftentimes what we expect from Mack Wilson, between 6 and 8 tackles. Okay. Akeem Davis-Gaither. I know a lot of people were excited about him because he's been uber productive for the snaps that he was playing, and the second linebacker slot was playing more snaps than Jonathan Gannon has typically done. Until this week when it reverted back to the past, where Akeem Davis-Gaither only played 55% of the snaps, and that's why he only had 5 tackles. That's simple, folks. Now, I've got to tell y'all I was wrong. I made a prediction on the Start Sit show that Josh Sweat had 3 games in a row, 3 sacks. He was playing 50% or less of the snaps, that the odds of him getting a sack again for a 4th game in a row with that limited snap was pretty low. Well, that fortune, look into my crystal ball was absolutely wrong, as he picked up 2 sacks this week, so that makes 4 games in a row on only 51% of the snaps. He also had 4 tackles to boot, which was great, but I still have a hard time trusting it, folks. Now, once again, excited to see the 4 tackles to go on the sacks, but remember, the Tennessee offensive line is not very good. And if you have edge players playing against the Tennessee offensive line, that's a great opportunity, particularly if you need a streamer. That's a great opportunity to play one of these edge players against that. So am I going to bet that Sweat has a 5th game in a row with a sack? I'm not going to do it. Does he prove me wrong again? Possibly. I'm just not going to bet on it, folks. Baron Browning led the edges with 58% of the snaps. As a side note, Birch, the rookie, at 52%. Zaven Collins was at 49%. Now, the defensive tackle position, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players play the defensive tackle position. None played more than 57% of the snaps. We're not playing any of those guys except if you're desperate in a defensive tackle required league, then I'd play Calais Campbell. Okay? Moving to the safety position, I know a lot of people went out and grabbed Adrian Taylor-Dimerson. I've been talking about him as a great stash for the future, but he's only been playing in that 50 to 60% of the snap range. He did play 64% of the snaps again this week. He had only 4 tackles. What sort of saved him was that interception, but he's also the one that fumbled it, that Keitrell Clark then kicked that went into the end zone that Tyler Lockett recovered, which was the beginning of the end for the Cardinals in that game. So that wasn't Taylor Dimerson's fault, but the thing is, outside of that interception, when Cam Ward was just trying to make something happen late in the game, he had 4 tackles, 64% of the snaps. Folks, that's just not going to be great for productivity. Still stashing him for future for dynasty, but not necessarily someone to keep, particularly if some of these cornerbacks come back from injury for the Cardinals. Now, what I will tell you is the rotation that happened in the slot/box/close to line of scrimmage. Budda Baker was at 54%. Jalen Thompson was at 58%. Taylor Dimerson was at 58%. And Keaton Crawford, who played 16 snaps, 75% of those were in the slot/box close to line of scrimmage. What you saw was this rotation of these safeties in the slot area to help with the cornerback depth situations, as only 2 cornerbacks played more than 80% of the snaps. Will Johnson played 82% coming back from injury. Keitrell Clark played 97%. And Denzel Burke played 15%, and he left injured. Mac Melton had a hamstring injury. He got added to the injury report late. He ended up not playing. So they used the safeties to kind of cover that slot, and they had rotations. And that's part of the reason in that utilization that we didn't get the numbers out of Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson that we hoped for. Yeah, they're playing the slot close line of scrimmage, but they're also having to do more coverage as a result of that, as opposed to maybe coming downhill chasing runners for tackles. Runners for tackles. We need those cornerbacks to come back for Arizona to help out Budda Baker in particular. The Rams in an overtime game against the 49ers played 86 snaps. That's a heck of a lot of snaps, folks. That's 21 snaps above average. So that's another third of a game. So with that, you would expect a heck of a lot of productivity. Nate Landman played 95% of the snaps and had 14 tackles, which is fantastic for Nate Landman. So he was Nate Land Mega Man this past week. He also had 3 pass defenses against Mac Jones, which was great. But when you play an extra third of a game with them trying to run the ball so much with Christian McCaffrey and with the 49ers offensive line struggle to create holes, Landman got some really good extra productivity. Don't count on 14 tackles. He had some really poor tackle games the game before. I'm expecting somewhere in between, expecting, let's call it 7 tackles, maybe 8 tackles for Landman as we move forward. Omar Spates was down to 44% of the snaps in a game, once again, where 86 were played on defense. That's not a good sign. Okay? Jalen McCullough played 52% of the snaps. Now, he's listed as a safety. He's been doing this quite a bit. He played 98% of those snaps in the slot, close to the line of scrimmage, in the box, whatever you want to call it, kind of thing. All of the above. That's a bad sign for Spates, but I also heard that Spates had a bit of an injury as well. So where you might have expected like a Troy Reader or a Sean Dolac, it was actually Jalen McCullough who seemed to have gotten more playing time in place of Spates. Let's watch the Rams injury report. You're going to have other IDP analysts, and they could be right and I could be wrong, either touting Reader or touting Sean Dolac, the undrafted rookie out of Buffalo. I'm telling you, Jalen McCullough might be the one to watch. Now, remember, though, Spates only plays 70-ish% of snaps. So McCullough's going to go from maybe 52 to 75%. And the reason I think it'd be a little bit more, because McCullough also played a little bit defensive back as well as being close to the line of scrimmage in previous games. So I think he might get a few more snaps than Spates. So that's how I think this is going to play out. Hopefully, if you're playing Spates, you're in the deepest of leagues, and the same would apply to McCullough. But that's the Rams linebacker core right now. Byron Young or Jared Verse are beast. We're continuing to play them. I think that's all we got to say. Kobe Turner started to snap out of things, playing 74% of the snaps, got you 4 tackles and a half a sack, which is fantastic. There was a Braden Fisk sighting. He actually had some productivity with 3 tackles, one of which was solo, and got a quarterback hit. Poona Ford got 7 tackles, but I talked earlier about how much the 49ers were trying to run the ball. They don't have a great offensive line. Great for Poona Ford being able to take advantage of that interior offensive line of the 49ers and get those tackles. Even Tyler Davis, who I don't think we've talked about on any of these shows, had 5 tackles. Okay. At the safety position, / defensive back position for the Rams, Quentin Lake, I think I'm going to have to fall on the sword. Yes, it was 86 snaps, so he got 11 tackles, but he's continued to be more productive than I expected for the most part this year. He's continued playing 85% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage. I think I'm going to have to fall on the sword on this one. This is the one my crystal ball was wrong on. Quentin Lake, you can continue to count on as a number 2 type safety in your leagues. Cam Curl continues to play basically 100% of the snaps with 7 tackles. He still played 69% of the snaps deep. Unfortunately, he didn't get us, interception or 2 this week, but he continues to be productive from that deep safety position. And I think part of it is because of some of the linebacker play in front of him not being very good, and it was creating opportunities for him to make tackles. Okay? That's all we're going to talk about the Rams because their cornerbacks aren't worth talking about. Oh, one more thing. Cam Kinchins only played 64% of the snaps. He had been playing in the low 80s. Because of he plays so much deep, hopefully you've been heeding our advice to not play him. Moving on to the 49ers. So they only played 68 snaps on defense versus the Rams, which tells you how the 49ers offense played a lot more ball control than what the Rams offense did. Fred Warner and Dean Winters both played 100% of those 68 snaps. Fred Warner led the team second on the team with 12 tackles. D. Winters had a disappointing 4. Now, the Rams, one of the things, don't get too disappointed D. Winters, folks, because the Rams have typically not giving up a lot of points this year to linebackers. So even though Warner did better than expected, don't discount Winters because of that one game. On the edge position, whether it be Sam O, Mikael Williams, Bryce Huff, Yetur Gross-Matos, Travis Gibson, they got 1 quarterback hit. It happened to be a sack from Bryce Huff. That's what we told you about Bryce Huff. Yeah, he got 2 tackles instead of 1. but he's going to be basically a sack or bust player for you. He did go up to 59% of the snaps, which was a little bit better, but that's what you're banking on Huff, a sack or basically nothing else. Moving to the secondary, Marcus Siegel, the young rookie, played 75% of the snaps close to the line of scrimmage, which was phenomenal, incredible, and that led to him having 13 tackles, 7 of which were solo. He also had a pass defense. They were singing his praises during the game. Here's the thing we got to be concerned about, whether it be him or Jason Pinnock, to be determined. Malik Mustafa's 21-day window to be activated from injured reserve has now been opened. When will Malik Mustafa come off of IR and be activated? We'll have to continue to watch. There's no news yet. But with that, does that mean Siegel's going to go to the bench, or does it mean Pinnock's going to go to the bench? Now, last week I talked about the fact how Pinnock used to play for Saleh. Saleh brought him to the 49ers to captain his defense. But in years past, now this was without Saleh, different defensive coordinators, Mustafa was playing deep and Jair Brown was maybe playing close to the line of scrimmage. So while my gut last week was saying Mustafa would take the Siegel role, is Siegel with these tackles, that doesn't mean he's playing great, but with these tackles and productivity, does that mean Mustafa moves into the Pinnock role and Siegel stays where he is? So we're not going to panic drop Siegel, even if in the first week Mustafa takes his role. If it happens for a couple of weeks, that'll be different. But Pinnock might be the one at risk, not Siegel. Something we'll keep an eye on, but it starts first with, does Mustafa get activated? And if he does, if you have other safety options, maybe we don't play Siegel that first week Mustafa's active, unless we get clear reports that Mustafa will play in Pinnock's spot. Upton Stout was having a great IDP game before he kind of got hurt a little bit. He injured his ankle later in the game. He only played 56% of the snaps. With that, he had 8 tackles, 6 of which were assisted, only 2 were solo, but we'll take those from our slot cornerback. Chase Lucas is the one that came in for Upton Stout. Depending on Stout's situation, Chase Lucas did have a very good preseason, is clearly the Stout backup. If the 49ers are playing a team with a lot of 3 wide, and you might have played Stout, and if he's inactive, maybe Chase Lucas, but I would hope there's a lot of other cornerbacks for you to take a chance on. And lastly, for the Seattle Seahawks, they played the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They only played 61 snaps, so below average. Ernest Jones played 61 snaps and received 7 tackles, or completed 7 tackles. Compiled 7 tackles. That's the word I was looking for. At the number 2 linebacker position, we continue to have this rotational mess, which means we don't want to play either one of these two unless it starts out. Tyrese Knight and Drake Thomas. Knight 49%, Drake Thomas 41%. Keep them on your rosters, and particularly in deeper leagues, but try and find something else, folks, until this shakes out that one of them kind of takes over the role. On the edge position, DeMarcus Lawrence was inactive due to his injury. Derek Hall left the game with an oblique injury after playing only 8 snaps. That meant Uchenna Nwosu played 75% of the snaps. Boye Mafe played 74%. Nwosu comes through with a half a sack to go along with his 4 tackles. We told you last week we didn't want you to chase Nwosu's 2 sacks, and that is still true. I don't expect that he'll play 75% or Mafe 74% on a regular basis once Lawrence is back, once Derek Hall is back. Nwosu, he's okay in deeper leagues, but he's also very injury prone as well. So in deeper leagues, particularly if Hall and Lawrence are out, maybe you can play Nwosu and he can give you 3 tackles and maybe he'll look into a sack or a quarterback hit or something along those lines. But don't count on him like we do some of these others from an edge perspective. At the defensive tackle position, Leonard Williams, 77% of the snaps, 4 tackles. Unfortunately, he didn't give us more than that, but we still trust in Leonard Williams. Byron Murphy, the second-year player out of the University of Texas, 64% of the snaps. He had 3 tackles as well. We're still high on Byron Murphy, and don't give up on Byron Murphy for those requiring defensive tackles. With Julian Love missing the game as we move into the secondary, Ty Okada once again picked up the Julian Love snaps, played 100% of them, and he had 7 tackles of this game, and he only played 48% of snaps deep, which is lower than Julian Love typically plays, which is very interesting that happened. Kobe Bryant came back this week with 8 tackles, playing 66% deep. So Kobe Bryant, we talked about him last week with all those deep snaps. He's usually much higher than 80%. Both he and Okada played a lot more closer to the line of scrimmage, very unusual for the Seahawks. And it contributed to Bryant getting 8 tackles this week, where he had let's just say a really bad game the week before. Nick Emenwari returned from injury, played 64% of the snaps. Now, he did get a little bit banged up. I haven't had a report yet on how serious it is, and he did go back into the game, is what I understand. But will he be limited in practice? If there are bigger impacts, we'll have to wait and see as injury reports come out. He played 100% of his snaps close to the line of scrimmage. 54% of those were in the slot, 33% in the box, 13% on the D-line. That's how things kind of shook out for him. So some good numbers for Emenwari, but let's check the injury report. And, of course, there's no Julian Love, and there is no Derek Witherspoon. Now, Witherspoon did not play. It was announced that he's gone for an MRI on his knee. There's been no report as of recording time here of the results of that MRI. Could Emenwari take on that slot role of Devin Witherspoon? That would be great if he did, but there's no guarantees that Witherspoon's out. There's no guarantees that Emenwari would, but it's a possibility. But Emenwari probably won't play outside cornerback, so he won't play 100% of the snaps if that were to happen. He'll probably play somewhere in the 75 to 80% range, just something to keep in mind. All righty, that completes all 32 teams. And I was really hoping to keep it under 2 hours, but once again, want to share a lot of great information with y'all. I'm going to work with Shawn. We're going to try and get this under 2 hours. Reminder that we have our Start Sit show every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central for 1 hour. Also, a reminder that I am on grandfather watch for my first grandchild. Hopefully, Shawn can be there as well. Shawn will be here next Tuesday for sure. Shawn may have a conflict as well because of a wedding this coming Sunday. So hopefully one of us will be there among those conflicts. But as of now, 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central for our Start Sit show for IDP Plus. If you like the show, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, put it on the YouTube show, and Shawn and I will get to those. Give me a follow on RickyRod66 at RickyRod66 and Shawn at Shawn8386 on X. And with that, we hope you have a great week 6. This is Ricky Rodrigue wishing you, your family, and your friends great health and happiness. And also shout out to my friend Shawn Teague. Be kind to one another, and we're out of here, and we will catch you next time, folks. And good luck in week 6.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.